Welcome to the Trish and Sarah Wrestling Podcast. I'm Sarah.
I'm Trish.
And this is our podcast. We talk about wrestling news and various topics from different promotions, primarily AEW, but also New Japan Pro Wrestling, WWE, and topics from around the wrestling world. Whatever we find interesting, and we hope you will too. We are a member of the Social Suplex Podcast Network, and you can find our content on our podcast feed, the Social Suplex Network podcast feed, and you can find our content on Twitter, on YouTube as well. Please feel free to like, subscribe, and rate our podcast. Trish, it's been 2 weeks, but you would think that I had not done that in a month and a half. Anyway, it is Monday, the 4th of March, 2024. This is episode 12, and we're going to kick the show off with discussing last night's AEW pay-per-view, Revolution, which aired from Greensboro, North Carolina, and featured Sting's final match. I don't know that I can say enough positive things about this pay-per-view. I think there's probably a couple of small negative ones, but overall, I think this, for me, was probably the best AEW pay-per-view, not just the actual show, but the build to the show in like a long time. I mean, what a spectacular in-ring action. The storytelling was great. Like, there was so much great stuff that happened on the show. I feel like we're going to kick it off by discussing what we liked and what we didn't like. Trish, what did you think about Revolution?
I pretty much echo a lot of that, really. I do think it was the strongest build since perhaps Revolution in 2020, yep. Which is still, I always think of that as the flagship, the standard bearer of builds to a pay-per-view. But, this one featured so many more people. It had just some incredible action. If you want that straight up kind of, I don't know, like 5-star chaser, should we call it? You've got... That's what they say, right? You've got the Ospreay Kester match. If you want, something a little more technical with a little bit more emotion, you had Danielson Kingston stuff. You had some great heel stuff with Christian, and then later with Hangman. You had a little bit of everything, and then what you get at the end. So like Sting, Darby, and the Bucks. That's like I think I've said this to you in person actually at shows. I always feel like I don't think it's much a secret that I am, as I get older, a lot more cynical about wrestling. And I think it's hard not to be, because the more you see or the more you experience, it's kind of like you lose some of that joy kind of feeling that you get out of it. And you kind of chase that feeling. You chase that feeling of like when you see a match or something happens where you get so emotionally invested that you end up with like this high that you just take into like the rest of the day. And like, it's like a buzz. And I always chase that buzz. I said that to you in Toronto. I absolutely chase that buzz, that feeling where wrestling can put you in that different place where you don't think about the rest of your life and you don't think about anything else. You just think about, that was fucking great. And that main event, that was the first time I felt that in so long, where I just went, this is just everything I want it to be, is everything it should have been. It's fucking perfect. And I just, I always want more of that feeling. So we're never gonna run down something that makes you feel like that. It's incredible.
It was the whole lead up to the whole match too. I mean, I think that's an important part of it. The way that they built the match, obviously the promos, some of this obviously impacted by Sting's father passing away and sort of limiting his availability. We had a hiccup here or there, but I think I started crying when the movie started playing in the movie theater before Sting came out. And I think I stopped because I was so excited about the match itself, and then started crying again at the end. To me, it felt really, really special because there are so many sad endings in wrestling. And I think you could just name them and name them and name them. And there's not as many happy endings. And it feels like Sting got his happy ending. And by extension, the audience also did. Like, we got to celebrate that incredibly special moment with him. And so much of the way that they set this up was perfect. Bringing the Suns back in and having them dressed up the way they were was just tremendous. It was also incredibly effective within the setup of the match itself, because you didn't have the actual participants setting up tables and doing all that, furniture moving, as they like to call it.
Yeah.
You could focus on the Young Bucks and Sting and Darby. You didn't have to worry about, okay, now we've got to take 20 minutes while Pac sets up a table and 3 ladders, which is the one thing I keep thinking about from that. It was like, okay, those guys are going to take care of it and we can focus on these guys doing something else. It was the layout was great. It was like, I feel like when I say this is going to come off the wrong way, but like, it was kind of a mess of a match, but like not in a negative way. Not that the match didn't do what it needed to do or that there were missed spots or bad things happened, but it was just like a whole lot of just insanity in the best AEW way possible. Like what, like if you could ask for, like if you could say this match needs to be an encapsulation of Sting's time in AEW, that was that match. Like just like I could talk about this for hours.
So, when it comes to laying out matches, the Bucks, but Nick in particular, is a complete and utter master. Yeah. And there is no one better in that company at doing it. I don't think there is. I don't think it's a secret why so many of the matches that they're involved in, whether it be 10-mans, whether it be tag team matches, whether it be, even when Nick's done singles, there's a reason why so many of these matches are just not only, some of the best in reaction, but the most emotional. And he knows exactly when to pick the spots, exactly when to do the comebacks, exactly when to do the big spots, how much time to let things breathe. He's and he won't take credit for it. He won't. But he's an incredible structure of matches. And with this one, they did so many perfect spots. Yeah, the stuff with his sons, I think in the end, that was why he kind of had to win. Once you tell that story, then the kind of the baby face has to go over. And it was the right call. For a long time, I thought maybe not because, there's this thing, the Bucks don't need it. Well, I don't know about that. I think, the Bucks have had their name put through hell for the last 2 years, and they've been down cycle for 3 now, since 2021. So I wasn't always on the thing of the Bucks don't need it, but it depends what you do after. So they need to be, top of that division in this tournament. And I know people are like, oh, they're going to do FTR and Moxley, Claudio again. Nice. But
we'll get into that in a little bit, I think. But
yeah, I'm not so sure on that because some of Mox's promos are kind of he's doing the Elite of the Lead stuff, and there's some stuff going on with Jack Perry and Shota Umino in New Japan that can play in. There happens to be a show in Toronto, California in June for New Japan. So there's enough kind of things to say that maybe not this, but. Yeah, what they did for this match in terms of structuring was just fantastic. Using Ricky Steamboat in the spots that maybe they would have previously used Ric Flair, knowing that he couldn't do that. They did the I'm sorry, I love you thing and then kick Flair in the face, which is something I've been talking about for about 3 months. Rather than, and then did the same thing with Sting, and he did the straight, kind of like firing up. And it was just perfect. And I think that Sting's made it very clear why he picked them, and he's made it very clear that he has an immense amount of respect for them, and he doesn't need to come out and say I don't give a fuck what anybody else says, I respect these guys, everything they do is top notch behind the scenes, because no one else in that company has been brave enough to say it other than maybe John Moxley for the past 3 years. So he didn't need to come out and do that, but it shows you that respect he has. And also, why wouldn't he pick the Bucks? I just think this is hilarious. People are like, why would he pick the Bucks? Like, this guy was an alternative. This guy was the last one of the WCW guys to go to WWE. He was the guy that always put people over in WCW. He was never selfish, always tried to do what was best for the company, even when they trod all over him. And it's like, California guy, it just absolutely makes sense that it would be the Bucks, and he's been a tag team wrestler for the whole time, and the Bucks are the ones that really pushed, we want this tag division to be the best. Yep. We want a tag team main event, and there was absolutely no way that it shouldn't have been the Bucks in the first tag team main event, and the fact that it was in this match with Sting and Darby and something that's going to be, there's not many things that are actually memorable. There's lots of things that are great. You see lots of matches and people go, that was a great match, that was a great match. But there are very few moments in wrestling that are memorable, and this one was truly memorable. So, credit to all 4 of them, but especially, the Bucks for laying that out, because, Sting's looked a little bit rough in the last year and a half. Especially we saw it at Forbidden Door. He was struggling compared to Forbidden Door the year previously in the 6-man. So, to get what they did out of him and to do all the callbacks and involve so many things and have proper heel heat. Jesus Christ.
The entire audience chanting, fuck the Young Bucks, which I don't think you would have had you had. Well, that's just what it boils down to, right? you say, okay, well, why would it be the Young Bucks? Who else is going to do that program? And who else is going to do that match, right? I don't think there's a single other tag team singles wrestlers put together that could have been so uniquely genius in the way that they set it up, just the program, the way they set up everything about it. It just worked out really, really well. And I just think, like, you know, it was also, for all that, again, Sting has this tremendous history, so much time in WCW, but it was also a very uniquely AEW match. Like, it was very much felt like it was an encapsulation of what AEW is. And that, to me, including anybody else in it would have felt a little bit off, I guess would be the way to say it, you know? Like, it just felt right. The people that were involved, like how the match was set up, everything about it felt right. And I don't know that you could have changed anything else. And I was definitely on the fence about Sting and Darby going over. I think I was even arguing late last week that they should lose. But I you know, how can you argue with that? Like, you know, that's one of those things where it's like, if you do it well, I'll totally say I was completely wrong. And I was completely wrong on that. Them winning, it was perfect. You know, like, everything about that was just, I don't know. The words are failing me because it was just that good.
That's one of them where you also take into account that Sting has been incredibly unselfish during his entire career.
Yes.
This is not a Hulk Hogan guy that comes in, demands money, demands to be put over, or Kevin Nash holding up shows. This was a guy that was completely unselfish, not just in WCW, you know, when he went to TNA as well. And, you know, he always put his family first too.
Yes.
And, you know, when you look at AEW, the embodiment of, you know, and this is a company with, you know, which has had noticeable issues with putting people over, but the embodiment of people that do put people over are the elite. Right. And I do think, you know, it's, as much as this is a complete look back on, like, Sting's career and they just did a fantastic job, I do think it's reminded people the importance of the elite this week. And especially, you think about if they had signed elsewhere last year when they were kind of being pushed out of company, would there be an Okada?
Right.
Would this match be what it was? Absolutely not. There was nobody else that could have done this. And the funny thing was, it was the most old school heat and angle and build up and match. And yes, they used plunder, but you use plunder to protect somebody of Sting's age and, you know, to kind of get around his limitations. So absolutely no issues with using plunder. But it's like the most old school thing you could do, and all their criticism and all the things that they bashed them for, and then they deliver that. And it was just, you know, and it wasn't like, oh, we're just going to boo you because of the whole CM Punk. No, we're chanting fuck the Young Bucks because we're buying into your characters and you're playing off it and you're killing it. It's you know, all the people that said it was going to be shit back in November, fuck you.
Oh my god. Listen, I absolutely had my moments, Trish. You know, we've talked about this where I was like, I don't know about this. I'm not sure about this from a gimmick perspective. Is this going to work?
It's the funniest thing.
Stupid ass idiot me. Like, how could I have ever done it? And like, I had this down even before, like, we set up our podcast notes last week, and I have been so delighted with this gimmick change and the whole EVP thing that I wrote in the podcast notes, the Young Bucks are geniuses, even before the freaking match, right? Like, just absolutely, like, the way they've done this whole setup with the freaking suits and the plane and they're such little fucking assholes, and it's so beautiful, and there's so much they can do with it that they haven't even touched, right? Like, so obviously a lot of it was built around Sting's final match, but the EVP thing can go so many heel places that it's just like, again, we talk about creativity. We talk about people setting themselves up to do something different, to do something new and unique. Like, again, I dare you to find somebody after all these years that are better than the Young Bucks at, like, okay, we've got to like, let's insert some storytelling devices that are going to make this more interesting than just, hey, we're the best wrestlers in the world. Like, you know?
Yeah, we're just going to pull kind of funny faces and look at each other while we're in submissions. Right.
Trish, we're not getting to that point yet.
No. Yeah, they are much, you know, and it's this thing, you've had 2 years of kind of publicly bashing them on top of the people that have always kind of not bought into them or, you know, made a gimmick or making money out of hating them. And that's the thing, you know, that shows you how successful they are, that people make money out of hating them.
Right.
And that's often lost, you know, when people say, oh, they don't make money. Well, they're making plenty of people money by the look of it to me. But yeah, no, you can take this gimmick, you run with it, you run with the tag division, do it. The tag division needs it.
The tag division
needs it.
Fucking desperately.
It needed it last year. And they are the best elevators of talent as well. They're the one thing that they do that no other tag team and not a lot of singles guys can do in AEW as well, is they can elevate anybody. They can get the best out of anybody. They can structure a match so nobody looks bad. And that's how many times have we seen it where people are like, oh, yeah, that team looks great. And then you realize they're just in there with the Young Bucks.
We talked about this at the end. Like we had the last two, obviously our podcast started and we had multiple pay-per-views to review, and we talked about at the end of World's End, right? There was no Elite on the World's End card. And we talked about
did we miss him?
Fucking boring pay-per-view that was, right? And like what a boring slog that was. And this time we didn't have that issue. And I genuinely think that them being as involved as they were absolutely set up for why this pay-per-view was. And again, you took Sting off this, it was still a fucking fantastic pay-per-view, right? I think there've been other really good pay-per-views this year. I think I would probably put Wrestle Dream up there. I'd probably put All Out up there from 2023. But in terms of like the build and the actual card, like this is just definitely, this is going to be a tough one to beat. Like you said, Revolution 2020, and I'm not sure if there's another one.
This had so much more emotion than full, so a lot of the other pay-per-views that you think of in the recent months just didn't have that feel, and that went down different parts of the card. So, you had, the Kingston Danielson thing, that had a lot of emotion. Interestingly, the crowd seemed to get quite behind Danielson at the end. And that was like, come on now, right? He needs to be a babyface. He's in his last 6 months. Nobody's going to boo him. Nobody wants to boo him. You are going to chew up your baby faces. And we've had this discussion last week. Fucking just move him across now, make him a babyface. And, then you had the emotional stuff with, what Swerve and Hangman were doing sort of thing. And, and he's the cleverest motherfucker in the company right now, right? Because
Hangman, absolutely.
Yeah, because you've got all these guys coming in, right? You've got Okada coming in. And, there's ways of making Okada potentially a heel, but even if you make him a heel, he's still going to get cheered.
Correct.
Jay White gets cheered as a heel now. He's funny and they like his promos, and they think he was hard done by MJF, so he gets cheered, right? Then who have you got? Who have you got on the heel side? Like Samoa Joe's not a heel, so he's a tweener. Yeah. Moxley's a tweener, but Moxley's gone and hidden the tag division. Not hid, but he's gone to the tag division, which takes him out of the way of kind of being putting some of these guys over straight away. So he's a smart guy too. But there's a space for a top heel.
Yep.
And it was the same thing, you mentioned it before when we were discussing this before we started. It's like Jericho noticed this in 2021. Yes, there was a space to be top heel. You've got all these guys coming in. You've got Ospreay and whatever. But then you had Punk and you had Danielson and Adam Cole. But you had this space to be this top heel, an actual heel, because it's so much harder to come in and be an actual heel. It's so much easier to be when you're familiar, when the audience are familiar with you, to turn and be that top heel. And that's the spot that you want really now if you've been there for a little while. So Paige is clever because it needed to happen. We've talked about it many times. They needed to do the switch. They've done the switch. And that match was, I know some people were a little bit down that match, but as soon as I saw the slot it was going in between kind of Ospreay and Takeshita and then the main, it was like, right, they're not going to go out there and this is not going to be aiming for like stealing the show. We're going to tell that thing that people say they don't do enough of, but sometimes do too much of. We're going to tell a story where we're going to kind of absolutely make you 100% that Swerve is the babyface and Hangman is now the heel. Yep. And you want to buy into that chase. Because as we said, I always felt that Swerve needed a chase as a babyface. We talked about this last time. You need that adversity and then he has to chase. Well, now we've got that. So you put that in there by using this. The biggest thing you have to be careful of is he's on a quite straightforward chase now. Hangman is going to become the more interesting character just by de facto. You can't stop that now because his reaction to this and because of the way his character has been, people will start to go, well, what's going on with him? And, if he is taking a break, that's not the worst thing for Swerve in a way because it gives him that space to breathe. Right. But then
that whole match and the whole setup between Hangman and that was, I think it's one of those situations where, yes, I appreciate that a lot of people dislike three-way title matches. Yeah. They're never as good as a singles match. And I think this one particular was, I don't want to say overbooked because I don't think it was overbooked per se, but there was a lot of of stuff happening. There was a lot of storyline beats that needed to happen that were not just, you know, in-ring action storyline beats. That said, like, you know, one of the benefits of having this show and having Sting be the focus of the show is that you get the freedom and the space to do that, right? Like, you're not the final, like, think about, like, and again, there's no comparison with this, but you think about the Devil storyline and the reveal of that having to be the final part of that show and how much of a letdown that was because it sucked, right? Like, this didn't suck. And at the end of it, you still had more stuff happening afterwards that was going to send you out on a high note and make you feel good. Like, they did get the benefit of that. But like, a lot of it was the work that those guys put into the emotional journey of this. Like, the second that Hangman tapped out, you were like, well, did he do it because he really wanted to tap out? Did he do it to fuck over Swerve? Like, everything was perfect. The beatdown on Bryce, who is probably right up there in terms of, like, I think the only thing he could have done would have been Audrey. Like, he could have beaten her up and that would have been more of an issue, but you're never going to do that. But like, all of that was really spectacularly done. They telegraphed the whole thing beautifully. Hangman has like done such a great job with being like, you know, I'm fucking insane and deranged now. And like, you know, he still has a core support. Like, Twitter today, people were like, I will fully support Hangman in this. He's done nothing wrong. And it's like, you know, it's just, I think this is the big, like, when we're going to segue to talking about Ospreay, obviously, and everything else, like, AEW has to really not make the mistakes of 2021. And yes, the stuff with Ospreay is amazing. He's getting a tremendous reaction. People are super into him. He's awesome. It's great. He's coming. You have no idea what's going on with Okada. You cannot lose sight of the existing storylines you have going on that people are invested in, or people are going to again start to believe that they can't get invested in your storylines because they're not going to go anywhere or they're going to get forgotten. Like, that's the only cautionary note that you want to say right now, which is kind of shitty because it's such a fucking great, you know, you're turning me into a pessimist, Trish.
Some emotional investment is incredibly important, and I think it's sometimes underrated, which is really funny. It's that, you know, you look at the stuff. So Ospreay comes in, and he's an incredible worker. You've got to then turn that into, so you get that initial kind of wow, he's fantastic. That only lasts so long, you know. You to make him into a moneymaker, and at the moment he's, you know, there's people that say, oh, he's a massive draw. Let's be honest, he's not a massive draw in terms of US TV yet. That takes years. You know, we've discussed that many times. Yes. He's not even a massive live draw in the UK. You know, people say, oh, Crystal Palace, they used like a half setup. You know, Kenny Omega was a much bigger live draw coming in, as I always like to say. But that's the thing. So you have to be careful with him, but you also need to get him into an emotional storyline or something that the fans are going to connect to, rather than just being, oh, this is a cool guy that does all this stuff and he puts on Match of Your candidates. But that's not the reason why he would be at the top of the card. You know, why did, you know, New Japan pick Tetsuya Naito over him?
Right.
Naito moves more business because there's more emotional fan investment in him. And you can absolutely say that, you know, his last few weeks in New Japan, he was getting huge reactions, but it was really the first time in his New Japan career that he was getting these reactions. And I've seen some of the stuff on Hangman, and they're like, oh, yeah, we'll never be. And he's justified as a heel, but that's the best type of heel. You know, when you can play into it and you can be justified in what you're saying, but he's come away from so many of the things that made him a babyface. You know, he's not trustworthy. He's a liar. His word is, you know, nothing to people anymore. Whereas his word was everything to him. This title that was everything to him is now secondary to his hatred. There's so many like changes in his character that he's using to kind of make him the heel. And it's the best spot for him to be right now. I think
there were so many incredible callbacks in that match, right? The belt shot, right, that he didn't hesitate on taking. Just there's so many freaking incredible callbacks to that match. That Swerve also being a part of that too, and I don't want to lose sight of that because it is not all Hangman. No. Like, Swerve is definitely, I think, in working with Hangman, I think Swerve already is a natural storyteller. Like, I think just the level of care and detail he takes in his presentation and the way he puts himself out there. Like, I think working with Hangman has been phenomenal for him because the two of them have been like, the story is the most important thing, and it doesn't have to be in the most traditional wrestling way. We can do it slightly differently. But like, the fact that like Swerve had Hangman's face on his gear, like, Jesus, like, just like, God, like, just some, like, there's a lot happening with this. It's interesting. And for all that Ospreay and Takeshita was absolutely fucking incredible as a match. Like, what an incredible match that was to witness. I can only imagine how much more invested I would have been had there been more of a storyline to it. And I realize I sound like a WWE fan. Like, if I had had a little bit more emotional investment in it, I think that it could have been like, holy shit, this went, insane. And that's not to... Ospreay has looked spectacular. He showed up in the AEW audience, obviously. And this is the part that sort of pisses me off, the people that are like, wow, I can't believe Ospreay is getting such an incredible reaction. AEW has presented Ospreay as nothing other than the biggest of fucking deals since the very first time he showed up in an AEW ring. They have never, and that's very different from how they presented Jay White. It's very different from how they presented other New Japan stars and people from other promotions. Ospreay has always come across like a giant deal. So of course the AEW audience is treating him like a giant deal now that he's actually signed and is irregularly. And it's not a knock on him to say that he hasn't had the best record in terms of drawing power and that's not a bad thing. And they can build that. That's achievable with him. Absolutely it is, especially for AEW, because so much of what appeals to an AEW audience is that in-ring stuff, right? That's the first foundational piece of it. But again, I almost feel a little as protective of Ospreay in some ways as I feel about Swerve, but for very different reasons. Give them the tools and the space to be successful. Dumping Ospreay into the middle of a title match 3 months in is just, to me, that just seems like a giant. And everybody today, Dave today is you have to belt him at Wembley. Multiple people were he has to have the belt at Wembley or else it's being malpractice and all this other bullshit. To me, I that's the kind of stuff where I'm just guys, it's been 5 fucking minutes. Can we calm down and take a breath, right? Maybe putting the belt on him at Wembley is a great idea, but at the same time, maybe it's not. Maybe doing it differently could be better for everybody involved. Let's just chill.
It's people talk. There's a recent example in the other company. Cody is much bigger now than he was a year ago.
Right.
Whether you like the story, think he should have won last year or not, didn't like the bloodline stuff in the summer, he is a bigger star now than he was then. That's it. And I think, you look for something similar with Ospreay. If there is not an emotional attachment to that story and it's just, I win in a stadium in the UK, you are not going to get longevity out of that. You're not going to get longevity out of him out of that, especially as a babyface. And there's only so much you're going to get, oh, he has great matches. Well, there's so many people in AEW who have great matches. Right. You have to have more than that. So yeah, I'm absolutely, I've heard all that, there's people that seem to think that you win a stadium match and it makes you. Well, Roman Reigns won 5 years in a row or something, and did it make him? No, They didn't make him until he turned heel. So it's not this surefire certainty that maybe it was in generations past, because there's so many of these big shows. There's so many big things. There's always something going on. TV wrestling moves so quickly. And at the same time, you want to give Swerve, don't make Swerve Hangman 2021.
No.
Do not make Swerve Hangman 2021 where you give him the belt, but you're actually building someone else over the top of him. You've got to give him every shot. And if Hangman is off for a little bit, and then comes back and can be first or couple of challenges and just kind of get that kind of, or whether he becomes the long-term plan in, that title story, you need to give him that rival and that sort of thing to keep him important. But you also need to keep him away from certain people as well. And he needs to face heels. You cannot put him against cool heels. Don't put him against baby faces. But you're going to have to protect him. And protecting him is not building Ospreay over the top of him. So that's going to be something they're going to have to manage. And that's why I said, if I was anybody on that roster, I'd want to be a heel right now. Obviously, Swerve can't be. Swerve is a baby face. People love him. You build that up. Probably going to happen in the next couple months. Do it while Hangman's out. If Hangman is going to be out, Hangman's going to be suspended. That's going to be the story.
Yes.
Referees, he's going to be suspended. So we know they're going to do that. For how long for? But then you give him that chance. Then he wins that belt, come out, and you've got an easy character story. And that's the thing about that match for me, is that it flows really nicely back into TV. Where the money is. Yes. And you can build that through all these debuts. So you've got that line, and this is what they had in 2021 with Paige and Omega, is that you have that flow line, that emotional connection to a story, all the while all these new shiny things are popping up. Because some of them things don't mean as much to some people as you would think. They're just another new guy, but they're actually, as you said, I'm invested in this story, I'm invested in that, I want to see that come to a conclusion. I don't care that, this person, I don't know who they are yet. So that's where you've got to kind of balance that play. But I was I thought it was a very clever match. I just don't think they went out to go, oh yeah, we're going to still. They absolutely went out to, we're going to tell this story. We're going to get the alignments exactly where we want them. We're going to get that next part of the story, and then it transfers back onto TV, so people are excited for that next part.
Yes.
And they're going to be excited for whatever that match happens with the Swerve, the next title match. We'll come back probably to the world title in a couple of weeks, I think. So we'll come back to it in a couple of weeks. But yeah, we'll see what happens with the Wardlow stuff. So
Swerve just did, before we move on to some of that other stuff, Swerve, you think about like the face acting, you see a lot, that there's a lot of complaints about like the kick out faces and everything else. Like, again, I talk about Swerve, and we talk a lot about Hangman because obviously we love Hangman. I don't want to lose Swerve in all of this. Swerve's face at the end of that, Swerve's face turns, like Hangman doing a heel turn is hard, but Swerve doing a face turn is really fucking hard. And he really did what he needed to do to pull that off, and not in an overblown, like ridiculous way. He was that face at the end of it where you were just like you said, it leaves you to that point of like, I want to know what happens next. What's going to happen on Wednesday? Where are we going with this? Like that's the stuff where it's like, yes, Ospreay is incredible. Okada is incredible. You have this incredible main event scene. There's nothing preventing you from also having Swerve and Hangman. You are going to lose Bryan Danielson soon. You're probably at the end of the God love him. You're at the end of the life of Chris Jericho as like your top of the card guy, difference maker. You need to start elevating some of these other people and have this be the next generation. Ospreay has to have people to have programs with, right? Like if nothing else, he's not going to beat Tony Nese every week. Like you have to do something here. So why not take your time and give these guys the opportunity to finish their story? I hate myself. But finish their story, finish what they're doing, and like let them breathe. There's more than enough for fucking Ospreay to do for the next 6 months or 18 months, right? There's more than enough for Okada to do for the next 6 months or 18 months. Do not feel like we have to rush this and screw ourselves like we did. Like you and I mean, some of this is CM Punk PTSD, but still, like, I'm just, again, you're ruining me, Trish. My optimism is, what a great freaking match. What a great pay-per-view. Like, like you said, what a fantastic feeling at the end of the show. There's nothing freaking like it.
Swerve is, and I mean this nicely to some other people. So some people come in and they are WWE wrestlers still, and they think like WWE wrestlers.
Yes.
Swerve is an AEW wrestler. Like Paige, like some of the others. Like he is that coded. Everything is about detail. Every bit of his work is thought through, and sometimes there'll be times where he might try too much or things might not come off. But you've got to remember, this is his first major run at the top. It's his first time getting regular kind of promo time. It's his first time doing all of those things. He's not going to be in the finished article straight away, but it's absolutely evident that he gets it. And he gets it in the AEW mentality, the elite mentality. And he has, they've got a group of guys at the top that, as much as everybody talks about people not wanting to job, well, Samoa Joe, Swerve Strickland, Hangman Page, Jay White, Kenny Omega when he comes back, we'll talk about Kenny in a second. Ospreay will have no issue with that. No. They have this core group of guys for the top of their kind of programs who have no issues with losing.
None.
There's issues with people underneath or in other divisions, but the main group of guys that they're looking at building this year around are not people who struggle with that. Hey, God, get Jay White back in the singles division. Yeah, use the Darby Allin thing and get him back in. That's another guy, he's going to be a tweener, but just get him back fucking involved. You have this great core who will actually try and build with each other, which is the complete opposite of what happened in 2021.
Correct. And I think that's one of the more, and to say the 2021 thing, it makes it sound like obviously Bryan Danielson has no problem losing.
No, Danielson, So I'm only thinking about Danielson because obviously he's kind of scaling down in the next 6 months. But Danielson came in and was able to do that, but then had to play a heel, but was also a face because obviously after Moxley had to kind of move away. So Danielson's not in that group when I say that, and Cole will absolutely lose as well. But there was issues with how many other people they brought in where they just didn't want to be, and this became so contentious, and it just that kind of atmosphere, that thing that brought the company together, and they want all the praise. And Danielson spoke about coming in after what happened with Brody Lee and not getting out, and not being this. We've seen 3 years now of just running to the press of fucking everything. Some people had like 6 potential outlets for every single news story. So they need to get back to having that kind of people trying to work together at the top. And you see the Alvarez quote about people getting kind of time cut. See, that thing is something we've talked about previously. I mean, I wrote like a real long diatribe on it back in October, and these issues aren't new. It was interesting it came up this week because, they're not new. And it's going to be something that happens. You've got a lot of people coming in, time that people previously had, or plans that people knew, weeks out in advance. That's not going to be the case. And that's going to be for some major people that were building blocks for this company in the first few years. So that's going to be something for people to kind of adapt and get used to. And not everybody will. But I do think there is between the guys who want it, shall we say, who absolutely want to drive the company forward. There is definitely, and from things that I hear quite regularly, there are people that they are very much invested together in this, and that's not really been the case for quite some time. And that's probably the most positive thing looking forward is, in terms of the main event scene, is if they are working together and they do want to push the company forward, and they all want bigger houses, they all want bigger live shows and TV ratings and that sort of thing. And that's where it's difficult because this is TV year, and you've got guys like Chris Jericho who are a TV draw still, as much as it kind of feels like he needs some time away. And you can feel that with the crowds. And I'm really surprised, that he didn't spot the gap that Hangman did and think, actually, I should be heel in this run with everybody coming in, because all these new guys and all these people who are suddenly kind of gaining momentum as baby faces need somebody to face. Right. But at the same time, he's still a TV draw, and they'll need to put him on TV. It's the same with John Moxley. It's the same with a number of other people. So you kind of have to balance that plate as well. But I think if you manage it right, you don't need to make 1 star. I think you can make 5 or 6 stars. And I think get lost to Kester as well, because
we can't not talk about him. He does
that so many little things that are just fantastic. The impact of his offense. I remember we were in Toronto with the forearms on Ishii. And some of the work there, and it's just like he's such a tight wrestler in terms of everything looks smug, looks snug, everything kind of just looks so impactful. And I don't think you can keep him heel forever. I think he's more of a natural baby face, just like when he came in. He's not a heel. Takeshita is not a heel, and you can leave him with Don Callis for a bit, but his offense and the way he kind of explodes, it's very Kenny Omega like, very Shingo Takagi like. So you will naturally kind of move that across. But he is so good. And it's probably not a surprise he won, most underrated or most underpushed people, please. Like, I can't do a third year in a row next year. Most underpushed. He is absolutely the most underpushed guy in that company. Yes. He should have been elevated post. Yeah, he should have been elevated post the Kenny Omega win and hasn't been. But he is absolutely the dark horse here because people don't think of him in that way. They name all the names and I don't think about Takeshita, but for longevity's sense and because of the way he works and his ability to adapt, he may end up kind of succeeding higher than some of the people that look for bets. So I just thought he was phenomenal in that match. People have their expectations of Will, but I just thought his timing, his impact. There's a time where he looked like he got rocked, and I don't know if we know or not, whether he did or not. But he's just phenomenal, and they have to push on with him. They have to find a way. And you've got all these guys that need pushing. But again, at least he also benefits from sitting on the heel side at the moment. Yes. You've got Okada to work with. You've got all these people to work with. Danielson's final run. So, and then you've got, this year they're going to have MJF back at some point. And he's naturally going to be a face at the start, and that's going to be an interesting one to manage because, his expectations and the way that he controlled the show in the last 6 months of his reign, there isn't that energy there from that, and I don't think there's the energy there from Tony for that now. So, managing him is going to be very, very interesting, and what alignment he's going to start off babyface. But in a way, it's funny because we talked about Swerve and his kind of the way he adapted to being a babyface and his facial expressions. He naturally adapted to that role far quicker than MJF did, who couldn't kind of manage it, couldn't find his spot, that thing that made him believable or made him kind of, connect to the audience in a real manner. Whereas Swerve just kind of gets that. So you want Max to end up heel, but it's going to be a hard road to do that.
What I think is so fascinating to me and is so important, and I think this is something that I find so frustrating, right, is you have AEW has a lot of incredible wrestlers with a lot of talents all over the place, and a lot of younger wrestlers who are still figuring themselves out. And I think one of the things I find so frustrating is when the conversation is so-and-so did this, write them off, get rid of them, fire them. They should never be on TV again. We saw it with Jungle Boy. We've seen it, especially at the end of the year with MJF. And I think, MJF had the back half of 2023 was rough. You and I are certainly not going to sit here and say, oh, everything was great, we're fine. We were screaming from the rafters that program needed to end, and oh my God, what the hell are you doing? But this is also a guy in his late 20s, 27, 28, who is an incredibly talented in-ring wrestler. He's a talented promo. He's an intelligent person. And I think how he responds to I think we can agree they're just brutally critically panned, especially at the end of the year in terms of the Wrestling Observer newsletter awards and blah blah blah. But
yeah, they killed him.
They killed him, and that's the kind of thing you feel that guy cares a lot about that. I don't know that for sure, and maybe not, but I just have a suspicion that guy cares a lot about that, and that's going to be a tough blow, right? That would hurt me. And I would feel I'd feel about that. How he recovers from that, whether he's got the resilience to bounce back and say, hey, I had a tough period. I had a bad year. People didn't see my vision. I need to change things up. I need to do things differently. That's going to be a real indicator of whether he can move forward and still be the top guy or a top guy in AEW, right? Because I think there are other wrestlers there who do have that resilience and do have that ability to pivot and will be able to do that. And I think that's something that it's going to be so important for him to be able to do. And I think it's still unclear now whether he's going to be capable of that. But I'm, at this point, it's kind of sad that MJF being off television in the month of January and February freed up so much time for the build to this pay-per-view. Right? Part of the reason why the build to this pay-per-view is so successful is because there was time to do it in, and that time was previously taken up with 25 to 35 minutes of MJF. If nothing else, they can't do that again. They can't, we talked about this, Kenny discussed this in an interview, you can't build the whole thing on one guy, right? That's why what we're saying with regards to Hangman and Swerve and all these other people, is you have to build up more than one guy, because that period is not a success for them critically or financially.
And yeah, that's the thing. So the ratings aren't struggling without him. They're the same as they were. In fact, some of them year on year are actually up. Rampage was up year on year in February for the first time in a very long time, which was interesting. And you think about it, you had Orange Cassidy and the Bucks kind of doing their thing on there for a number of those weeks. So yeah, that was kind of an interesting thing to see. But yeah, he's going to have an interesting, and then eventually you're going to have Kenny Omega back into it. Oof. And Kenny is the real guy that I think people are not thinking about, because last year he was the biggest babyface in the company.
Yes.
He was the biggest money-drawing babyface in the company. Ratings-wise, the cage match, the Vikingo match, they ended up headlining Double or Nothing because that one needed kind of pulling out the mire. Forbidden Door. He was the money babyface last year, and that gets lost because he lost so much and he was underplayed because of whatever. But when Ospreay did his promo on Wednesday, he lists the people that he beat and they cheer, and they get to Kenny and they boo, and it's Kenny Omega is the one that they're not going to accept him other than a babyface, and they will want him doing big things. And you're going to kind of keep him from eating everybody else up. People talk about Ospreay, but I think Kenny's the guy that I would be if I'm on that side going, okay, I want to be careful now. And they have some natural things they can do with that. I think there's definitely some Kenny Hangman stuff you can do in some point in the future there. In terms of pulling him out of his heel thing. That will be something they put, you look at doing down the line. You need to probably finish the stuff with Bryan Danielson.
Yeah.
Because you've got a natural thing to do with Okada. You've got to be careful with him, though. His body, there was a reason he did so many trios matches at the start of the previous run. His body is just not made for, the Kenny Omega schedule that you saw in 2017, 2018. It's just not there, even 2020. So you do have to be careful with him, but he will be the biggest babyface in the company when he comes back. I have no doubt. I don't see anything else. So yeah, lots of cards to kind of manage, but it's a very healthy division. It's a very healthy top, and they want to push forward. It's a TV year. So, do the big matches. You've got Darby Allin and Jay White coming up at Big Business. You've got to get their matches out every week now. Yeah, get them out every week and use it, build the stories. This rotation, this cycle has been phenomenal with building up so many of the matches running into the pay-per-view, as you said.
Well, and it shook stuff up too. Like, it was Orange Cassidy needed to lose that international title. Like, it's past time. He did an incredible job. Like, let's do something different now. Like, it was kind of weird the way that angle didn't play in. Like, it seemed like they were setting something up there, either for Trent to do a swerve on Orange. There was that thing where it was like, don't come out to the thing, and they didn't. Like, it was that was a little bit of a weird left hanging, but at the same time, I thought the match itself was great, and I'm fine with Roddy winning. It was wonderful to see Kyle O'Reilly back, right? You've got Pac back; he's on his way, which is spectacular. Like, you talk about people that are like that are going to restore the feeling. Like, Pac is one of the original, like, oh, I'm watching AEW guys, right? Like, I'm not watching something else; I'm fucking watching AEW. What else? There were. Definitely not all of the matches on the card were successful. I think the Garcia Christian Cage match was spectacular. I really enjoyed that. I thought that was great. I thought Eddie and Danielson was great. I thought that the scramble match was less successful. It just didn't seem to gel in any kind of way. I don't know what was going on with that. And obviously Wardlow winning a title shot again just seems like a bad idea to me, but maybe one day. They just
continue to force him. And it was worrying because you thought, well, they put him in the original Cole slot and try and Joe and try and get it back to MJF in that program. Because, Roderick Strong needed something for that faction. Because that faction is dying. That faction closed out the last pay-per-view, was the big whodunit, pay-per-view seller, and is now mid-card fodder. And no better than mid-card fodder.
No.
And, that faction, and I thought, okay, Cole's injury, and thank God he's in a wheelchair, by the way. Thank God.
Yeah.
But
no more crutching
enough crutch. Hangman stole his crutch. He's got it now. No, that faction needs some juice, but is Wardlow the answer? No. And, there was a time where I can't think who he picked up for the power bombs. It might have been Dante, but it was just complete silence.
Yeah.
And it was like, so, and you'd think, they're setting him up for Joe, but that would make him the babyface, but they'd cheer Joe. And it's like,
cheer
they're setting him up
Wardlow.
Or are they setting him up for Swerve? And then you're like,
don't do that.
Neither of these options are good. Are good. So, at some point, you're just going to you need to cut time. And so, and I know that they probably want to do the MJF thing. So MJF gets his win back. And, he's the main guy in the faction right now because Cole is still injured. And Cole's, they love Cole. And, it's no secret that Tony loves Cole. But he's probably under quite big pressure when everybody comes in and comes back. He's a guy that could get lost in terms of he can put people over as a heel, but there's going to be other people above him. So that will be interesting to see. But Wardlow's just cut your losses on that one.
Honestly, Cole is a fucking mid-card heel or an upper mid-card heel guy. It's not the end of the world. Let him go back to being the smarmy dickhead that he does really well. Like pushing him to I don't think anybody would be as annoyed with Cole if I personally didn't feel like he's getting TV time ahead of guys that I like better and would like to see more of and are more interesting, right? Like, that's, I think, some of my frustration with Cole. I don't dislike Cole. He seems like he's an absolutely wonderful human being, but it's just like, this has been a rough year for him. And for me, I get why they you have to have that whole devil storyline and MJF and everything else. But I just feel like MJF coming back and going immediately back into a Wardlow Cole vortex is such a bad idea. Like, you're basically saying, you're going down in this hole and you're going to have to try to find your way out without a ladder. Like, I don't know, but
you've got to get him out of his comfort zone. They've got to get MJF out of his comfort zone as well.
Yeah,
we're not picking and choosing. I can do this, I can do that. I'm comfortable with this. No. Let's take you out of where you're comfortable and have you challenged. Have people who work with you to make you better, to give you more depth and versatility, and help you find your voice. Your voice, not picking every babyface of the last 20 years that was running around, either Vitamins or The Rock or whatever. No, you need to find who is MJF, the babyface. If that's where you're going to stay. It absolutely makes more sense that he eventually pivots back to being a heel. He's so much more effective in that role.
Yeah,
and you can lord that over everybody. Cole is better to me as babyface because I always think he's small. His moveset is a babyface moveset. And he had, had a brief bit of success with the MJF stuff with the tag. They got lightning in the bottle. But you look at the program before with Chris Jericho and you just say, Jesus fucking Christ. So,
that was rough.
Yeah. But it's very interesting. They really cut back on him in recent weeks in time. The focus has all gone into Wardlow and he's a background player that barely even says anything on commentary. So, yeah, there's Wardlow, whichever way they go there, we'll see. Just make it quick and don't do anything stupid to try and get the belt back onto MJF or anything that. No. Just the focus is you have to cement Swerve. That's it.
Yeah.
And you do that not just for cementing Swerve, but you do it also for the efforts of Joe, of Hangman, of other people that are putting efforts and sacrificing some of themselves to ensure that he gets over as a top guy. So you need to do that next, no matter what. But my God, that scrambles should be fast paced, high impact, and the spot fest essentially. And that was probably the slowest spot fest I've ever seen in my life. And I'm sick of meat chants. Meat chants, they can go and fight forever, and this is awesome. They can just fuck off. They can just fuck off. No, it's just
enjoy a good meat chant, Trish.
All we do is we chant meat. We're not paying any attention. We don't give a fuck what happens in the match. Sorry, I'm cynic. I fucking hate that shit.
You can hate stuff. I support you in disliking things.
This is awesome chant. The funniest, this is an awesome chant in that tag match, the BCC FTR one, where it's like 100 people really tried.
We have to talk about this. So Trish and I are definitely not in the same page as a lot of folks. I know Dave Meltzer today felt that the BCC FTR tag match was the third best match on the show the second best match on the show is what he said. And I was like, what the fuck? To me, every fucking BCC FTR match in whatever configuration has had, like, if it's a 20-minute match, 17 minutes have been boring as fuck, and the final 3 minutes have been actually good, right? Like, and the match last night was no exception. I just felt like it never hit second gear until the very, very, very end. And this was despite the fact that fucking Claudio was like leaping up onto top ropes and doing like top rope uppercuts. Like these guys are all good wrestlers. And again, I can't stress this enough with FTR because I know I'm not always nice about it, but like realistically, FTR are great wrestlers. But we talked about Nick Jackson. We talked about Hangman and Swerve in the storytelling. There's more to a fucking match than cool moves. And that's like an endless thing that people bitch about with AEW is, it's just moves. It's never just moves in AEW. The best matches in AEW are not just moves. And anybody who tells you that they are is not fucking paying attention. There's always something going on in those matches. And like, we've talked about this before with FTR. If they don't have that chemistry with the other team, it just doesn't work. And I don't understand how they don't have good chemistry with BCC, but they just don't, in my opinion. I'm shocked by how boring these are.
Just dull. And, people pretend that it wasn't for the first half, and then you watch the crowd and they were just sleeping. And this is in North Carolina. This should be huge FTR country. This is home base country. I don't know, people say, it was Hangman's home base as well, but that's why he ended up with a mixed reaction at the start, and then he had to convert that into a heel reaction. But they should have been the super baby faces. I thought it was very funny, actually, right at the start of the match, like before Moxie jumps the barriers, and he puts like the two fingers up to try and get the crowd to boo him, and they just cheered him. I don't know. Because the BCC, they need to sort that out. The alignment,
they got to figure out what the fuck they're doing there. Yeah,
especially with Danielson needs to go babyface. It doesn't work. I don't know. People say, you can be tweeners. No, you just hurt everybody. Look at the reaction with Danielson and Kingston. That should have been, everybody behind Kingston. And by the end of it, 3/4 of the crowd want Danielson to win. So you've got to fix it for this next few months. You can do that if you're going to do Kingston. No, sorry, if you're going to do Claudio and Mox and bring them involved with the Bucks, which is, I think, where they're going. There's too many little things for that. Everyone's like, oh, it'd be FTR.
I can't.
Moxie,
I'm not doing another FTR tag title reign. And there's valid reasons behind this and just not my personal bias, okay? First of all, we fucking sat through it already and it sucked. Other than like some great Bullet Club Gold tag matches, the rest of it was boring as hell. They're not able at this point in their alignment to freaking elevate anybody else, okay? They tried it with the Workhorsemen. They tried it with, what was the other fucking team they had the match with? It's
that's it.
Right, I can't even fucking think about it. And I did a whole 30 minutes on this during one of our episodes, Trish, and I don't even fucking remember the name of the other team, okay? If you want it, this tag division cannot handle another fucking FTR tag title run. We can't have them losing to fucking we can't. No more singles, guys. No more nothing. Put legitimate tag teams in this fucking tag tournament and have the Young Bucks go over and then have everybody fucking chase them. And have the Young Bucks go over because they're asshole EVPs who stack the deck against everybody else, okay? They should be beating like the lowest of low-level teams and then cheating the fucking... Like, this is one of those things where, like, again, it's not against FTR personally. We saw what happened. It didn't work. Do something interesting. Get a heel team in there because FTR are not going to be the heel team that you need to have for these guys to chase. Right? You need all of the rest of these amazing tag teams to have somebody to fucking chase. And it needs to be somebody who can do it. And like you said, is willing to get actual heat. I am so fucking sick of like, sorry, rant over. But those matches are fucking boring. I don't understand why of all the teams that you have on this roster, FTR gets endless 30-minute matches. They would all be so much better if they were 12 fucking minutes. Why?
They're like 20, 30-minute matches and they never go above 4 stars.
No,
like you telling me they wanted to. You think if you give them 25 minutes, that's what you'd expect? If they're the best tag team in the world with John Moxley and Claudio they're in there with, and they deliver that each time? Yeah. One match on Wednesday that went so long, it was like,
oh my God.
It was unbearable.
2 ad breaks.
No, they are not the people to be in charge of this division. No. Having a heel team for people to chase, because that's where the money is. And there's a reason why. If you look at 2021, we had a heel Bucks team, a heel world champion in Kenny Omega. Yep. We had heels for people to chase when they went back on the road because that's where the money is. And these are a team, the Bucks are a team now with real heel heat where people want to boo them, but also are watching them. The numbers are there, aren't they now? So they keep that going.
Those quarter numbers for them have been absolutely spectacular. Like, and let's not kid ourselves. That, like you said, the Rampage ratings are up year over year. There's no surprise as to why that's happening. Like, these guys are starting to get that momentum again. And quite frankly, you want AEW to have momentum again. You need the Elite to have momentum again. It's just
you don't cut them off for their knees now. No, you don't cut them off for their knees. And FTR aren't elevators. That aren't who they are. They're great when they're in there with great teams. But even on this case, they were in with this great team for three times, and it wasn't great. No. So it was good, not great. And you need to be more than that if you're going to be given all this time, given all that. And it's not like their ratings movers either. It's not like they do big numbers. In fact, in the last 6 months, they've kind of been the opposite. So it's a strange one as to why there is such a heavy investment. But you've got to make the most of this, the Bucks main event in the pay-per-view, all the attention that's been on them, Sting's endorsement. You've got to make the most of that now. Run with it. Have them be absolute assholes. Have them be the ones that eventually remove Hangman's suspension. You want to do that. You don't need to align him straight away.
No.
Need to put him,
keep them separate, but have it be like a throw-off or something. There's so many things you can do with that.
Sign this off. Yeah, they can bring Jack Perry back. They can use him as their kind of their, and there's definitely something going on there. Matt Jackson's running around doing his kind of the Jungle Boy pose as he comes out on the ramp.
Which producer Leah pointed out and I was like, holy shit. She was like, he's doing the move. And I was like, he's doing the fucking move. Like, there's something going on there. I'm sorry. You're 100% right. I felt like an idiot for missing it. Leah's a genius. But
Leah wins.
Leah wins. Always. I just think at the end of the day, like, I want FTR to be successful. And I just think that the way they're going now and the way they're handling things and that this is just a setup for them to get, like, in another 3 or 4 months, no reaction. Like you can already see it starting to go. It's like, okay, like like nothing is new, nothing is interesting. It's the same old, same
there's
old.
No depth.
Like,
there's no depth.
There's no depth.
It's just,
there's no depth.
It's just my family wants me to win. I want to win. We want to be the greatest guys. We want to be old school guys. But, actually they work a very modern style. So I've always found that quite funny. Yeah. But it's like, the Largo loop kind of kickback rather than, Memphis 1980. But it's harsh, but true. It's one of them. Yeah. So you need to get some depth. I don't know what you do to change them characters up. Cash has obviously got his gun charge, which I know a lot of people expect to just kind of be wavered off, or minor kind of penalty hanging over him. But they need some depth. There is no character development. There is nothing different about them, and that's why when they face BCC or sometimes when they've been facing House of Black as of late, they've been run over by cool heel tweener units who at least have some movement, some forward progression. And there's this, we want to be the greatest tag team of all time. So actually, we beat the Bucks in All In, and we're now the greatest tag team of all time. Okay, so then what's next? That's why you should never do things like that.
No,
it's never do things like that, because then it's like, all right, so we have nothing left to achieve.
Right.
And what benefit? Oh, we want to be the third. We're going to be the first ever 3-time tag team champions. That'll be the next thing.
No one cares about that shit.
There was part of me that actually thought they should win, and then they should do the job to the Bucks that they were supposed to have done last year. When we had the is he injured, is he not mess in October. Yeah, so there was part of me that was like, actually, you guys should probably win, and then you should job to the Bucks. But actually, no, I don't think I even want to see it. It's like, just do the Mox Choreo stuff, get the New Japan involvement, building up to Forbidden Door with Shota and Jack Perry, and do all that stuff. There's enough to do there without kind of, and the CML stuff. You could do, God, can you imagine them working with the CML guys? These tag teams with the Bucks. That would be
that would be incredible.
Nick Jackson with any of them. Like, they can naturally work with luchadors in a way that FTR struggle to sometimes. So, yeah, absolutely. It was just dull. It picked up in the last few minutes, but it was a very WW. I talked about earlier about Swerve being an AEW wrestler. Yeah. FTR to me are still WWE wrestlers. A WWE tag team. The style they work, and that 20 minutes, and then we do the last 5, which is all people remember. And it's such a WWE style.
Yeah. Well, we want to bring up the fact that AEW did hire a writer, right? For the first time. We have the hiring of Jennifer Pepperman, who is a long time, I don't want to say long time, she's been with the WWE for a while. And before that, she won a bunch of writing and directing Emmys for being a part of soap operas. And I think a lot of people were sort of quick to shit on the soap opera part of it. But let's be honest, you want to talk about wrestling has no off season, soap operas don't either. And those things run 5 days a week, 52 weeks a year. So in terms of the level of pressure of consistent storytelling. And I also think there's probably some relationships there in terms of the type of over dramatic, over the top storytelling you get in soaps that you kind of get a little bit of in wrestling too. But I don't immediately think this is the terrible thing that some folks made it out to be. I am sort of excited. I am sort of excited and looking forward to now that there is a name of someone who works backstage, and it also being a woman's name, a bunch of people blaming her for anything they dislike that now happens in AEW.
That's going to happen. That's going to happen.
100%. We've seen it all the time. But I think one of the things that AEW needs help with is that we talked about and this goes back, this is a valid criticism from Big Swole. If you are someone who can come up with concepts for your own creative and can put that stuff in your mind, you've got it made the shade, right? You can pitch your own ideas, you're great. If you are a really good wrestler who's not the most creative person in the world and can't kind of come up with ideas for yourself, you're going to struggle a little bit in AEW. And I think we've seen that. FTR, in my mind, are a perfect example of a team that's stale, that can't come up with an idea for themselves. We've seen it with Ricky Starks. We've seen it with other folk like Hobbs. You've seen it with people who it's like, guys, can we do something that works to these guys' strength? And maybe Pepperman's not the person to do this. Maybe that's not something she's going to be able to help people with. But if nothing else, there should be someone else back there. And I also think, a friend of ours brought up the point that you don't want to have, and I get they have ex-wrestlers, they have agents, they have people doing this, but you also don't want to be in a situation where you have more than we have one person wearing too many hats, that they can't absolutely, provide those and provide the guidance that the way they need to guide it, because they're both being an agent and a trainer and a this and a that. And now, I've got to teach somebody how to do promos, and maybe I need to think about creative for this person, and I got to think about creative for that person. Having someone like this who can kind of do this, and is also a freaking woman. Like, we've talked about this in terms of like different perspectives, like writing for women, like, making the women wrestlers feel like maybe there's something here. All of this to me comes across as a positive. Maybe it isn't. We'll see how it works out. But I can't see this as I can't see it as, just because WWE had writers doesn't mean that AEW is going to have terrible writers. Just because this person was hired to work with Mercedes Moné does not mean that it's going to be this terrible thing.
Yeah, there seems to be a little bit of an obsession over she's like Mercedes' personal writer. But maybe she was hired in terms of making sure Mercedes is happy. And, people will say that's a precedent and you don't want to go down. But we had 6 months of Max TV last year. So it's not like, and he has his network, Pat Buck and people like that are all his kind of collective. So it's not something we haven't seen previously. However, yeah, God, how many times have we seen something on TV? You thought, God, if there was a woman in the room, they would have just gone, no.
Don't do that.
And that sounds, that's very stereotypical in a way to say, but it's absolutely true. You need that kind of, that safe check of somebody as well. And I think it's a good thing in a way to have somebody that's worked in wrestling for a few years, but also has worked outside of wrestling, who isn't just, this is what always works in wrestling. So, yeah, I think it's far too early to be jumping on somebody who's been there 2 weeks. And that is already what's happening, which is quite funny. And it will be worse because she's a woman, as we've seen with other elements of, AEW business. If they know a name and it's a female name, then everything bad is somewhat associated with them. And sometimes that gets involved with talent, criticisms as well, which is, it's just blatant sexism in some ways that's been kind of really uncomfortable, and it's kind of come more to the forefront of all the other issues that we've discussed in recent weeks and months. So that's where it's a huge challenge. But yeah, let's see how she goes. Let's see what impact it has on creative. There's obviously been a huge creative switch in terms of the women's division, and there's still issues. I do think Tony needs to be a babyface. I think she's eating up every babyface there is.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you.
Coming in. Yeah, and then you've got Mercedes coming in, who is going to be the focus point and star of the division. I know some people are worried about that. There's some people compare it, she's like Punk and she's quite demanding and she'll want to be the focus point. But that's a division without a focus point. So it's much easier to kind of move her into that because the investment is not the same. And maybe it shouldn't be, and maybe that pisses people off. But you can see where the opportunity is there. And maybe that's why they want to keep Tony Hill for now. You have to bring Britt back into that. Sooner or later, you're going to have to bring Britt back in because you're going to need a strong talker with Mercedes. You need strong workers. I think, you see with the tag match that kind of was on the pre-show, you see some of the limitations for some of their mid-card female workers as well. Yeah. And how as soon as it kind of gets out of an easier formulaic kind of layout, things can fall apart. I think that's happened the last couple of pay-per-views on the pre-shows, actually. So, yeah, I don't see anything bad in bringing in a strong worker. And, Mercedes in the ring is an elevator as well. She's very, very good at elevating other talent. I always think back to the Royal Rumble match in 2019 with Ronda Rousey, which is probably the best match of Ronda's WWE career outside of the debut. So that's the sort of thing that she can be really good at. We'll see how she recovers from latest injury. She's, it's very hard because the sort of thing we talk about with women football players in the UK is that, the body is different. So the injuries, the accumulation is different. It's why a lot of female wrestlers have shorter careers. There's injuries like ACL tears, which are consistent across, a lot of sports at the moment with female athletes. So we'll see how she recovers from injury and what she can work with. But she will be a star. And she will be a ratings mover. I have no doubt. She will absolutely be a ratings mover when she comes in. And the division has needed that, and you can see that there's been movement with the division because it's moved out its Q7 death spot quite a lot of weeks. They have lots of momentum and movement in terms of collision, especially, which you can do more on because it's a smaller and loyal audience that tends to watch most of the show. So you can get away with doing more and kind of giving these people the exposure that they need. And that will move things forward. Yeah, having a female voice and a female writer, and not just for female talent, but just to move stories forward and kind of look at how they're progressing, or just to veto stupid things that, you know, a male voice might not necessarily kind of think about, I think is a positive. But yeah, that's one the jury's out, and I think people are jumping far too quickly into this one work. She's WWE writer, but you don't do it when it's a WWE wrestler.
Right.
It's kind of funny that.
I just don't understand that concept of like, you know, well, they're just hiring her because she's going to make Mercedes more comfortable. Well, why is that a bad thing? I mean, we've seen this happen repeatedly with AEW. They bring in WWE wrestlers who are not comfortable with delivering their own promos and or are used to having promos scripted for them, and they struggle at first. We saw it with Saraya. We've seen it with other people. Why wouldn't you want to rectify that?
Adam Copeland,
yes.
Yeah. Even someone as experienced as Adam Copeland has had trouble adjusting to that, yeah.
Right. So why wouldn't you want to bring in somebody that's going to help make your an investment you're putting a lot of money and effort and energy into promoting? Why aren't you going to want to bring someone in to make that successful? Again, that goes back to that thing of like, if you're not someone who's perfect at every aspect of what AEW fans view as wrestling, you know, then screw it. You shouldn't even be bothering, which I think is just so short-sighted and dumb, right? Like, let her have somebody there who can help her. Let her have somebody there who can help her find her voice. Maybe this person can be useful for other people, men and women, right? Because sometimes you end up, you're just more comfortable with someone, right? Who knows if Pepperman's somebody like a Wardlow or a Hobbs or somebody else is going to be like, wow, I really can relate to her. She's got great ideas. She really speaks to me and my character. And now I'm doing something different that I hadn't thought about doing for the last fucking 5 years, whatever. I don't know. I just, again, maybe it doesn't work. Certainly anything is possible, but the idea that you're going to just immediately say, oh, we can't do it, it's WWE, dumb, short-sighted in my mind.
I think having another creative person in there to take some pressure off Tony on a year where they've got a TV deal to negotiate. Yep. And yeah, he sounded like really bullish this week. It's probably the most confident he sounded in a very long time. You know, when he's talking about, you know, we regularly, you know, he was just still in an exclusive period with WBD negotiating. And he's talking about how regularly they beat the NBA. And when you look at their kind of, their kind of rate of decline compared to them, because pretty much everyone's in decline from 2020. But the NBA came out of the pandemic just like AEW, like on fire. So, you know, this return to live kind of events and that sort of thing. But also, you know, you had some star-making stuff going on there. And then their decline in the last couple of years, like this year's been quite sharpish. So he's using that as a barometer. I think that's kind of important because people get so wrapped up in comparing them to WWE. But wrestling as content and itself is cheap content compared to soaps or compared to like Real Housewives or anything like that, or especially compared to sports. And the NBA is going to increase in value, even though the ratings aren't increasing like, say, the NFL. So, and you're going to sell more with like the in-season tournament. And Zaslav's already kind of talking about, yeah, we're going to keep NBA on the platform, but maybe, yeah, but we're going to keep our budget, which suggests that they're going to start splitting games more with ESPN. And so there is a deal to be done there, but he sounds very, very confident. And, you know, with Dynamite especially, you know, the placements, they place top 5 practically every week. It's much stronger than it was in 2020 when they signed that deal. They are holding up stronger than TV declining as a whole, which is important. And, you know, we're starting to see some year-on-year growth on certain shows this year, which we weren't really seeing last year. And will be interesting to see how that kind of moves in March and April of how much kind of big shows they've got planned. And last year there was kind of a struggle. And I know you've got, March is a busy month because you've got the college basketball tournament and that sort of thing. And then we'll get into the NBA playoffs, which has killed them quite consistently. Yeah. But his focus is going to be on completing that deal. You know, as he talked about it as the biggest injection of cash into the company ever. You know, that is the most important thing this year. So as much as we talk about making stars, doing like that, it's getting that deal across the line that, you know, kind of controls the future of the company. Yeah.
All right. I feel like that wraps up our conversation on Revolution, at least at this point. Sam, anything else you want to add? No? Good pay-per-view? Right.
No, it's a good pay-per-view. Yeah. Enjoyed it. Right. Nice to enjoy it. Nice to enjoy a pay-per-view after a while.
So yeah. Missed too. It's been a little while. So our next topic of discussion is prompted by a tweet we received from a listener. So thank you very much. And I apologize if I'm mispronouncing this, but Branavan Candia said on February 22nd, Trish and Sarah, I don't know if you do listener topics, but I'm curious to know you guys' thoughts on the current idea that Meltzer is losing his edge or has lost it. So Branavan, thank you so much for asking. We do listener questions when they are topics that we're interested in, and this one spoke to us, and we decided to discuss it. So a lot of this is coming up is based around a couple things. So we alluded to this briefly on our last episode, but about 2 weeks ago in the Wrestling Observer, Dave Meltzer kind of had one of those periodic occurrences for him where he reports something in the Observer that people are like, that's wrong. And he takes a lot of heat and aggravation and people talking at him about like what he was wrong. In this case, it was a remark. It was a written remark in the Observer that there was a rule that CMLL talent could not appear on the same television show as AAA talent, even though that was sort of shown to be, at least people felt it was false because I think Commander had a promo on an episode of Rampage that a CMLL wrestler was on. So people were like, you know, again, as often happens with Meltzer and some of the stuff he talks about was like, ha, gotcha! Like, whoa! Sometimes with these folks, I sort of want to see, I flash back to the Mission Accomplished banner, and I always want to post that as a GIF, like, Mission Accomplished, we got him! Like, well, he was wrong one time, wow. And the second one was Dave reported that Tommy Dreamer had taken over as the sort of head of creative for TNA, with Scott D'Amore being let go. And that was sort of refuted in like 3 separate places that there was actually a booking committee that Tommy Dreamer was on. But then it was sort of came up that it was maybe, you know, it is a booking committee, but Tommy Dreamer has a more outsized voice in it than other people would say. So again, not necessarily this kind of like, he completely misreported what he was talking about, but he, you know, got like a slight detail wrong or a small thing different, or he used a word he probably would have been better off using, you know, wrestled rather than appeared when it came to the CMLL. Yeah. I think Voices of Wrestling did a really good rundown 2 weeks ago on why the criticism was a little bit overly zealous, I guess. But I kind of find this topic fascinating because I do think that there are some valid criticisms of Dave Meltzer fairly recently, but these are not them. And I want to preface this by saying that, like, you know, first of all, who the fuck am I to criticize Dave Meltzer? The man is like, you can ignore half of what I say here because, like, again, who the fuck am I? The guy's been doing this for 50 some odd years. He reports this stuff every week. He does multiple like radio programs on a weekly basis. And I can tell you from just doing this little podcast for like 12 episodes that it's hard to like think on your feet and come up with topics and not sound like a dick and not be a jerk. Like, these are all really challenging things. So like on that note, like I'd like to kind of temper that criticism with all that stuff. And I hope you guys will remember this as I continue to talk about this. But I do think there's a couple things that probably we could get into in terms of, you know, how Dave reports some things and the difference between what he reports on in the newsletter and what he talks about on Wrestling Observer Radio, because I think that's a lot of where some of the criticism comes into play. And I think media literacy is also something that a lot of wrestling fans are missing. So many wrestling fans seem to be completely unaware of the idea that Trish could tell me today that she plans to go out to lunch with a friend, and then tomorrow could tell someone else that she didn't go out to lunch with that friend. And both of those things could be true because she could have had a plan to go to lunch and that plan could change, to use the age-old words of the meme. And like, that's one of those things that I think, you know, people tell Meltzer stuff and then stuff does change or happen and people get mad at him that he misreported it. And it's like, well, he was telling you what he knew to be true at the time. And that's not even getting into the whole carny side of wrestling, which is people always trying to work an angle and trying to, you know, basically get Dave to report shit for their own reasons. And we saw that so much in 2022 and 2023 with CM Punk and all of the Punk camp, as it were. So I think that's kind of an important thing also to remember. So I guess, you know, part of the reason I think where Dave takes so much criticism is because there's no one else doing it the way he does it. I don't think there's a single other person as prominent as him in wrestling media. Wade Keller does a lot of some of the similar stuff that Dave does, but he never seems to take any of the heat that Dave takes on a regular basis.
Nobody sees it. Unless he writes it, nobody actually sees it. Yeah.
Right.
And there's a lot. Sometimes there is actually more kind of controversial detail or things that can be kind of checked against, and it just doesn't get picked up on.
No, it's fascinating. You also have Sean Ross Sapp, obviously, in Fightful Select, but they don't do a lot of analysis. They do very little deep analysis or very little sort of deep thought. It's very kind of quick hit, like, here's what we are hearing. Here's
TikTok news.
TikTok news is the perfect way to describe it. Yeah. So, there's really nobody else who does it. And I want to say that I think one of the things that I think Dave does better than anybody else is that I trust that when I'm reading something in the Wrestling Observer newsletter, that Dave is telling me the most accurate and least biased opinion of that journalism than anybody else. And I think folks will disagree with me on this, and this will probably be the part we get pushed back on the most. But if you think about somebody like this is something that comes up a lot, right? People always say Brian Last has sources. This is always a thing that comes up whenever somebody says Brian Last said it. Brian Last has sources. We get told this quite frequently. I believe 100% that someone like Brian Last has sources. Absolutely. But I also don't know that I trust Brian Last to tell me a thing that he himself personally doesn't agree with, right? So if there's 20 people talking to Brian Last and 18 of them say the Young Bucks are an incredible tag team, everybody loves them backstage, they do incredible work, they're beloved, and 2 people say the Young Bucks suck, everybody hates them, I sort of think that Brian Last will tell me that the Young Bucks suck and everybody hates them. And I think that's kind of the big difference between someone like him and someone like Dave Meltzer, right? And I'm saying Brian Last specifically because there's a bias there that everybody's sort of aware of, right? But I think Dave is a little bit better at not allowing his biases to influence his reporting. That said, I don't think that is the case all of the time. And I think you can kind of see when that comes into play. And I think for me, the stuff that I would say I could probably criticize, it's been more recently with the stuff he's talked about with the most recent stuff with The Rock and Triple H, right? And the whole Cody Rhodes storyline and the way that broke down. It seemed to me like there was almost a lot of the discussion on the radio was well, this has to be true. And the attempt to reconcile the two very different stories that seem to be coming from The Rock and Triple H in regards to how the Cody Rhodes angle came about, whether it was always the plan, whether it wasn't. Dave himself at times seemed to be really confused about this. And as a result, it was kind of like, I'm not sure what's going on here, I guess is the best way to describe it. I'm sort of floundering a little bit with this, Trish, in terms of, talk to me about what you think. You were like, I disagree. I'm going to argue the opposite. Which we've discussed 12 times is my favorite part of any conversation is when we disagree. So do you think that there's any issues that Meltzer's had, and are they more recent or are they things that have occurred consistently throughout his reporting time?
I think there's probably things that would be consistent about in his reporting time, or things he overlooks. And some of that's like an old school mentality, and it's very hard to kind of remove yourself from that and see things in a kind of a modern kind of outlook. But look, I think it's very, very difficult. I think wrestling news in general is very, very difficult. Yes. I think there are very few actual reporters. And a lot of people get away with writing 4 or 5 words on something, or we'll just tell you where this location is going to be, where it's going to be. And I don't know if that's enough. You're looking for people that deliver depth for me when it comes to wrestling journalism. And, the only people that really write a lot of long form stuff that's actually kind of good analysis is Dave over at The Observer, and then John Pollock and Brandon Thurston over at Post. And, you get the odd thing coming from like Voices of Wrestling. But I guess the thing is about a lot of this for me is it's not even about what he writes. So in terms of the one that sparked all this, so there's been a few things that sparked it, right? So you had the CMLL thing, whereas if he wrote the word wrestle, like he wrote later in a tweet, appear to wrestle, then we wouldn't even have this discussion. As Voices of Wrestling summed up quite nicely. Yes. And the same with the Tommy Dreamer thing. So by the look of it, he is the head of the booking committee. People pointed out that he did the phone call to TNA Talent after Scott DeMore was fired. He also is the one that people have been told to contact from other businesses, sponsors, and the like. And it's very clear that he'll end up kind of probably being right on that, but it's just about terminology. And then there was I think the Triple H Rock segment where somebody had sent him the segment, but most of us just kind of looked past it and went, well, they are kind of teasing a Triple H Rock match, and that is a bigger match, and they need to be careful with that. So we just kind of went, well, that's a stupid mistake. Should have been picked up by an editor. Whereas other people just kind of focus on it. It becomes this thing. Yes. Actually, the most important thing in that whole issue of The Observer was the long form write-up on the Ashley Mazzara situation.
Right.
That was the most important thing in the Observer that week. That was the thing that had, the most valuable content, that's going to be the biggest story that is currently in wrestling. But we didn't see that because, one, it's behind a paywall. And this is a general movement we have in media, not just in wrestling, that with the way that financially kind of business and news reporting is changing, we're seeing more and more kind of the detail and the analysis content and even the standard reporting moving behind a paywall. So what you've got left as free content sometimes is AI generated, a lot of time is aggregation. So you don't get that kind of detail and analysis unless you pay for it. So we're restricting that news flow. So what people's opinions are of people and opinions of their writing in a lot of ways is often tended by how it's interpreted by somebody else and how it's delivered to somebody else. Right. So let's be clear. I fucking hate aggregation.
Yes.
I hate it. I could not hate it any more than I hate it. It drives me up the wall because what's being reported sometimes by these reporters is often lost, and then follow-up is missed, and you get no context.
Yes.
So you're getting no context. So just do an easy one, right? So thinking about things from the summer that are easy to do. So do you remember, there's a couple ones. So do you remember when Dave said the atmosphere after the first collision wasn't great, and everybody went, oh, no, it's fine, because all these news reports went out to PW Insider, to other places that kind of said, oh, no, everything's great, everything's fine.
Vibes backstage are great. The vibes backstage are great. Right?
Yeah, what happens 3 months later? Yeah, 3 months later, we find out they weren't all great.
No.
So people are very quick to jump on something like that. But then there's just loads of easy ones. So take the Adam Page being barred from the building thing. Okay? Yep. So Dave breaks that story, and that's aggregated. PW Insider are then fed that it was just moved locations, and people believe that. Right? Yep. And that gets aggregated. And that's where people believe the story is. Dave then puts out, and I always think about this because it's so rare anything on Page gets out, that he had the text message that said, don't come to the building to keep the peace. So he's like, give the evidence. Was that aggregated? No, never aggregated. Right? And there were so many things that weekend, even up to like the Jack Perry stuff, where we aggregated the Punk story that went to Sean Ross Sapp that he said came from him. Yep. But we didn't aggregate the stuff that came from Brian Alvarez, where we found out, the way he was talking in his complete condescending manner, that, was a behavior that people expected that had happened previously with Punk. And then the fact that he was, I had already had it approved and was on vacation. So how these stories are kind of interpreted and what people believe is all based off aggregation. And it's the same with, the recent Hangman thing. And Hangman's a hard one because he doesn't communicate everything with everybody. No. It's what people don't get. So when people think he might be injured, that would absolutely be put out there. And we've seen some things in the past where he has not manipulated media, but ensured that his privacy was protected. Right. So people jump us around, and the next day, Sap puts out, he's not injured, he's fine. And then, Geraldine endorses it. But then Alvarez and Meltzer do their kind of work and say, actually, it's a personal issue. Brian talks about how serious it is. None of that gets aggregated. So you are judging these reporters not on the actual content. You're not reading the content. You're not reading it in, with its where it should sit. What's the content around it? You're just reading tiny little snippets that have very little value to me. And it's so frustrating. So, he will make mistakes. He produces far more content than anybody else each week. Yep. Nobody produces that level of content, especially written content. And whatever you think of his written content, it's an absolutely invaluable news source. It's an invaluable data source. And the analysis, the top pieces are, and they do tend to be right. And on the big stories in the last year, I think he's beaten everybody, the All-In stuff, the TV deal. He's run circles around people when it's actually mattered. And he is more neutral than anybody else. All in straight afterwards. That puts Punk story straight up. He didn't wait and see what the other side was. They just put the Punk story up. So people are shaped by that. But I do get this funny thing where people say, I only believe like one journalist.
So
I only
dumb.
believe PW Insider. I only believe John Ross Sapp. I only believe Dave Meltzer. I only believe, I don't know, I think it's some more, Wade Keller. And it's like everybody talks to different people. This is a huge industry, and everybody's working some sort of agenda, So sometimes, and we've seen this with so many things in the last year, you need to build up a picture, and just believing one person or that information is not going to give you that picture. You don't get, I don't know, say like a huge political kind of thing, happening somewhere. You don't often get that picture from one journalist who has one viewpoint. Something major happens, you read as much news as you can, and you tend to look at different outlets, try and move to different things. And, it's getting harder and harder. News media is under enormous threat. We just seen Vice,
right?
Great investigative media outlet, who are no more. Tim Marchman, we spoke about previously, has been a huge kind of voice so far in the Vince McMahon investigation kind of reporting, and that doesn't exist anymore. So we are losing a standard in media, and we are also becoming ultra reliant on aggregation because more things are moving behind a paywall. And this is just a general thing. But it is meaning that the ability to think for yourself and to put pictures together, or even to go and listen to content yourself. A lot of the time the content is on, the Observer will put that main segment up on YouTube, and that people don't go and listen to that. They just believe the aggregation. How many times have we listened to something on audio, especially with Dave? This is the easiest one to think about. But how many times have we listened to something on audio and there'll be like a passing comment? And actually, when we've looked into that passing comment, it's bigger news story than anything that's said that's been aggregated.
Yes.
We've got to think probably about 5-6 times in the last year, the major news story wasn't anything that was reported. It was something that was a little comment, and then you go and find that story and it's huge. So, people that often listen to a lot of different, we listen to a lot of different journalists because that way you can kind of get that more rounded story. And it's like, people say about Wade Keller. I don't always agree with Wade Keller, but I listen to him because the viewpoints that he's getting from people in WWE, and Tom Martin similar as well, are different. And actually they make me challenge. And I like people that challenge my thought process. I've said this of Joe Lanza as well, Voices of Wrestling. It's like, challenge my thought process, make me think differently, make me kind of put all the picture together, not just, I only believe this person, because actually you're only kind of getting a quarter of things. You're never getting the full picture. And I just think it's getting more and more dangerous in that aspect.
I agree with this, and I think this is why when I wrote this up, where Brandon was like, has lost his edge or lost it, and I was like, I do have criticisms of Dave Meltzer, as I said at the beginning, but they're not like, he got this one fact wrong, right? Or he did this differently, right? Because I think once you start listening to Dave regularly, and people say this all the time to the point where it is also still a meme, but like you do start to get the rhythms of what he's saying. And it is almost like, this is part of the reason why you and I became friends, Trish, is because the two of us really, really enjoy decoding what Dave Meltzer is saying. Like we just, and there's not a lot of
I've got a degree in translation.
Seriously.
I think.
There's not a lot of women that do this. Like, I don't know a lot. No. I don't think I know a single other woman who listens to Dave as soon as it's up and is like, let's talk about what he said here. I think you could absolutely, have some criticism of the way Dave Meltzer covered the CM Punk stuff last year. He himself said that he was way too easy on Punk, that she should have and could have done things differently. Like that was his own personal, I think that, some of the way that he's talked about the Ashley Massaro case and how it seems like, and again, this is not something I want to ascribe to him because I feel like I'd want to ask this question directly, but in some of the ways that I've interpreted the way he's talked about this case, it seems like it never occurred to him that the WWE would lie about what they were saying in terms of, he seems almost sort of recently shocked about the WWE's credibility not being there when it comes to some of this sexual abuse and harassment and rape stuff, which sort of surprises me a little bit. Like I wouldn't think you would trust them on anything, but again, I could be misinterpreting what he's saying. I think there are ways in which he talks about women in minority wrestling in a way that you would sort of say like, my dad understands racism at a personal level, but doesn't understand the institutional effect of racism, right? Like you want to say women wrestlers are not trained as well. Well, why is that, right? Like, is there maybe an institutional reason why that hasn't happened? Is there like that's the kind of stuff like when he wants to talk about Vince McMahon's legacy, right? Well, can we talk about the negative side of the legacy that involves people that don't look like Ric Flair, right? Like, I think those are the criticisms that I would say are more apparent to me than like, an aggregator caught him in like a small mistake, which quite frankly wasn't a mistake to begin with.
Yeah. Oh, it's just a matter of interpretation.
Correct.
And yeah, I think there's just too much kind of people just wanting to play gotcha.
Yeah,
and less actually wanting to look at the issues. It's just a way of avoiding the issues sometimes. People don't actually, or they don't want to hear certain things. So they try and find ways to not hear certain things. Oh, I only want to hear this. And that's more about consumption than is actually about the media being provided. And, we've seen that. I was watching one of the post episodes on YouTube where John Pollock talks about, not everybody wants us to keep talking about the lawsuit. We're getting feedback and the fact that, they're keeping focus on it. Dave on his Friday shows especially is keeping focus on it and trying to change the conversation, the conversation you had with Lance Storm on Friday night about the culture of wrestling. And that's what we need to move forward to. So the fact that they're even trying and attempting to kind of move the discussion in that direction, and I keep bringing up Post because I think they've been really strong in the last few months and Pollock's writing's very good. But I look at it and I think, there is no one pulling information together like this outside of that.
None.
If we just go to kind of TikTok news and just kind of small little snippets, this industry won't move forward. It will actually move backwards. And some people would like that. They like the information to kind of be closed down, but the analysis is important. The analysis is just as important as breaking, what location this pay-per-view is going to be in or who's injured or who's signing where, because it's all about impact. And that, because the impact and the business numbers is what shapes people. It's what leads to this guy getting a push or that woman, getting a push or not getting a push. These things will influence, not just, and where you watch TV, where you're consuming this wrestling, how much is there on? It's all really important. So I just think that I don't really care as much about this small little fact or this that can be easily corrected. And you can allow people to correct him. He corrects, news all the time. Great.
Absolutely.
I absolutely have more value in that and then doing kind of strong analysis that then can be discussed than I do, not having any analysis whatsoever.
Oh, yeah. No, I don't think that, I think too many people are guilty of listening to Wrestling Observer Radio at like 1.5, 2 times speed, listening for a juicy nugget rather than taking in the whole totality of what you're being told. I think too many people are skimming the Observer looking for hot news rather than hey, let me really carefully read this and what it says. And, I'm as guilty of that as anybody at times. And I think we've all certainly done that. But there's, for any criticism that I have of Dave Meltzer, there's nobody doing what he does. And the business will be in a significantly worse place when he finally retires or hangs it up or is no longer doing it. Significantly worse place because there is nobody doing it. And like you said, the TikTok news stuff is not going to be something that's going to be able to carry the industry over. It's not going to be something that makes the industry better. It's just going to be, wow, Jordan Grace had a great time at the Rumble.
The other thing is that, both him and Brian are accessible.
Yes.
And we've challenged them. My God, some of the things that we wrote to Dave and Brian recently on the board and things. But you can challenge them and he will think about his way of thinking. And that's invaluable as well. There's nothing worse than someone being completely pig-headed or just being, I'm never wrong, or just a mouthpiece. We've seen so much of that in the last few years of people just being mouthpieces and then finding that they have no value once that's been removed. And I find it that well. But it's a serious thing is that, we need people in future who will build the picture, who will distribute this information in a fair way. And we need to be relying less on aggregation. And I don't know how you do that because, the world is changing. And, that little snippets of when the news kind of thing pops up on your phone and that's what you see. Yep. That's becoming so much more of a constant rather than kind of chasing detail. And there are people that chase detail and we subscribe. We subscribe to the Observer, we subscribe to Val, we subscribe to WrestleNomics. We chase that detail and that content. And what we try and do, ourselves is try and interpret and kind of put stories together and build them. Yes. And, find that. To me, the journalist's main role is not just to report something. It is to make it, kind of easy for consumption, easy to explain. Take this really complicated subject and try and make it so as many people as possible can access it, understand it, and understand kind of what needs to happen to move forward. And that's something that we're in danger of losing in wrestling because, there isn't money in it in that aspect. There's not money in outside the main platforms. So it's difficult. I worry, like, what would it look like kind of, post-Observer world? A lot of people, I'll be fine. But so much of it is curtailed off, or the analysis is just not there. It will lose so much depth. And that's something that I think we have to be careful of. And it's a general media problem. It's something that, especially with the rise of AI, it's probably only going to get worse.
I think the Punk stuff, especially in the summer with Collision, was a big, wide eye-opener for me in terms of people willing to just print stuff that, it's like, I get that you heard this, but that doesn't mean that it's true. And if you're not willing to say where it came from, then you're sort of giving off the wrong idea to people. And I think we saw a few people dip their toes into that kind of quickly backed away from it, right? That realized they were about to get burned and said, "Hey, I'm not. This isn't what I do," right? But Punk was
after he left. Come out and burn him. Not in a bad way, but he basically said, this is all what he's told me. This is when it's friends of Punk. This is when it's Punk camp, and this is when it's him. It's quite a strong thing to do, in this world of wrestling where people say you should never do that. So they learned in a way from that, but they still used it to drive their kind of business without providing kind of the other side in a lot of circumstances.
Right. I mean, in a situation like that, one of the first things is media literacy you should be asking is, who is the person that's most likely to have shared this information and why are they sharing it? And if you can tell that right away, then there's an angle there that you need to be conscious of. And it doesn't mean the information is not correct or there's not value in that piece of information, even if it's extremely biased, right? Even biased information can be sort of telling. But you still have to kind of say to yourself, well, I can't just blanket believe this because Sean Ross Sapp said it, right? It might be true, but like I need to be conscious of the fact that there might be a motivation behind this, and why is it and where is it coming from? And I think that's something that unfortunately media literacy in general is poor, and in wrestling it's just not great at all. So I feel like that kind of covers our Dave Meltzer topic, but it just sort of bleed into another topic, Trish, which I think we want to tackle, which is talking about WWE, which we usually do, and in this case, sort of discussing Elimination Chamber, right? Because we talked about Dave and Bryan being accessible, and one of the things that's come up recently in terms of criticism of the way that they're covering WWE and talking about WWE is, WWE's changed, it's different. Have you watched it recently? This was kind of a big discussion point. And you know what? I felt seen by that comment because your girl has not watched WWE recently. I've seen a lot of clips, but I have not sat down and watched an episode of Raw. And so I was like, you know what? This is a valid criticism I need to reevaluate. And so I sat down on a Saturday morning and watched Elimination Chamber. And I'm going to tell you, it made things worse because Jesus Christ, it was awful. Like, it was objectively terrible. And I'm sort of like, I kind of struggle because now, like, I hear Dave and Bryan talk about WWE and I'm like Dave gave the freaking the star rating and whatever. Like it's subjective opinion, and I get that. Even though Dave tries to claim it's an objective, and I get what he's trying to do with it, but at the end of the day, it's what he thought of the match. And the men's Elimination Chamber match was bad, and he gave it 4.5 stars. And I'm like, this is what you're telling me I should go out of my way to see this? It was just dudes laying on a mat for minutes at a time. It was like, I said this to producer Lee. I was like, it was like the worst battle royale. It was like the worst side view of an AEW battle royale where like Chuck Taylor and John Silver pretend to fight each other, but mostly just lay around on the side of the mat for like 5 minutes, right? But it was like that for a half an hour, and it was freaking guys like Logan Paul and freaking Randy Orton. I think that's the thing when I talked about that. And this is where I think maybe most of my disappointment with Dave Meltzer recently has come in, is this sort of discussion of, WWE is doing business. And we saw how this kind of, in my opinion, this sort of broke down with the Observer Awards, right? WWE is doing really good business. Therefore, it must be good. It's not good, but it must be good because it's doing business, because business is how we measure whether or not the wrestling is good. It's doing huge business. It's got to be good. Is it good? No, but it must be because they're doing great business. And then you sort of saw this happen with the Observer Awards and like the whole, WWE won Best Promoter, Best Booker. What was it? Did they win Best Promotion? I can't remember some of the other ones, but they didn't take home a single award. They didn't win best pay-per-view. They didn't win best television show. They didn't place in any of the best matches of the year. Like, so you have a show that's the best, you're saying is the best, but none of the individual pieces that make it good actually were good. They were all beaten by something else. And I appreciate the criticism of AEW and the storytelling. I don't know if I can say that the WWE storytelling is better, but I do think, and we've talked about this, there's some valid criticism about, follow-up in AEW and what happens, after an angle is over. I think you definitely could, I don't think anybody's going to argue that the Devil storytelling was good or that should have been anything other than the worst of the year. But like, that's the part where I'm kind of like, where's the criticism of this? Like, that's like, why is no one talking about how much this sucks? Like, other than the usual suspects, why are people like, oh, this is great? It's not great. It was terrible.
Sorry, I need to turn that off. Okay. Right. Sorry, Leah. I always make it harder for you. It's fine. So I kind of laugh because I am one of those voters. I literally did vote them promotion of the year because in terms of promoting, like, did I vote in promotion of the year or did I vote CML? I might have voted CML, actually. I need to check that. Hang on, let's start that bit again because that's fucked up, isn't it? I think I did vote CML. Oh yeah, I did. Okay, yeah, I've just sent my list. Okay. Okay. I'm laughing because you think about that and I can see absolutely why they got promotion of the year, and it's more of a de facto because everybody else didn't have a great year. New Japan were very much down. AEW had so many placings in the worst segments or the worst awards that kind of cost them. So you can have all these great pay-per-views and you're having these great matches, but it was like the wrestlers were outperforming the booking.
Yeah,
and I think that's
I
how
agree
I
with that.
So it was kind of, they did good business, and they had plenty of returns to lean on. They did these huge stadium shows, but especially creatively post SummerSlam, the Bloodline stuff was really hot till SummerSlam, and then the Jey Uso Roman Reigns things was just, that was it. That was the kind of curtail on that, and then they finished the end of the year just relying on returns. CM Punk, Randy Orton, whoever. So it's one of them where I can see how it got that way. But yeah, it's hard to think of it as a good show. Do you remember when Punk was doing his first promo on Raw? And everybody sat through Raw. And they went from, this is the death of AEW, this is the end. Yep. Yeah, that was really bad. And it's kind of funny. But, what's really funny is, so I've told you, my brother went to the show, Elimination Chamber. Yes. And so he's in Australia at the moment. We're travelers. We're travelers. And one of the funny things that he brought up was, everyone criticizes AEW's merch at shows.
Oh yeah.
And so they criticize AEW's merch and they say, it's this and that, and even on Sunday, it was all Dana Massey's fault, right? But they had like some stink shirts, a couple masks, and that was it. So actually, what they're retelling has barely changed. So right. It's kind of funny, isn't it? So there's something for people to think about. But he said that in terms of the merch, there was not many shirts on sale, mainly Elimination Chamber, Stone Cold, The Rock, people that are irrelevant for that show, Cody Rhodes, and then Rhea Ripley. And then they had Ripley's leather jackets on sale, and then a few badges and wristbands and a few championship belts, and that was it. So that's not too different to AEW, and AEW get absolutely kind of slaughtered for it. And this was a stadium show. That's much less than what was on All In, I can tell you that. So that was kind of interesting because, again, that never gets picked up on. The city did a lot. They decorated everything. They made everything much easier. The viewpoints were awful, but it's a stadium show. You get used to that. It's like hard. It was really hard to watch the chamber matches. So putting chamber matches on in a stadium is, it's not exactly fan friendly. And they said at times the screen wasn't working, and you had people chanting, we can't see. Kind of reminded me of WrestleMania 35 when they turned on these red and yellow lights and blinded all the crowd. It looked good on TV, but no one could actually see it. And it just reminds you that, they don't really care too much around the fans. It's more just about how we deliver the product. And, this one it wasn't a sold out show. It wasn't this huge crowd or anything like that. It was a very, very big crowd, and it got a site fee, so nobody cares. So we don't look into analysing that and saying, yes, it's perfect. It's Western Australia. It's harder to get to than a Melbourne or a Sydney. But was it a successful show as when they ran Melbourne a few years ago? Maybe in gate because they charge higher ticket prices, but did they get more people to the door? No. Did they get even close? No. Did we do everything to maximise that card? Did they deliver for that fan base when they did just these matches? He put on here, like, a lot of the crowd were very disappointed not to see Roman and The Rock. So the two guys you're main pushing don't make the stadium show. I'm sure when they booked the stadium show, people thought they were going to see people of that caliber. And as much as Cody's Cody right now, he's just Cody, and he goes everywhere.
Well, he didn't even have a match. He had a freaking in-ring promo segment with like an interview. It's the Grayson Waller experience. Like, I think this is where some of my frustration comes from, because I look at today, for example, right? Brian Alvarez, God love him, was very critical last night of the fact that AEW had one match announced for Dynamite on Wednesday, right? That was bad. Shouldn't have it. That's a problem. That's an issue. Well, Raw has 2 matches announced for tonight, and there was not a peep said about that. And I think it's very easy to get into that kind of like gotcha type thing. And, and I don't want to do that because, like, again, some things you want to be critical of and some things are not. But it does feel like there are times where over and over and over again, AEW were held to a completely separate standard, right? Whether or not the value for money was there. You're asking the taxpayers to provide you with money just to come to fucking Western Australia. And then you're going to give them a show that, in my mind, is shit, right? Like, even if you want to say like the actual matches ended up not being good, was it good to begin with? You don't have your top stars there. And the other 2 top stars you have aren't wrestling, right? And there's no... Like, it doesn't even pierce the discussion of what, the discussion is like, they're super hot, they're selling tons of tickets. Like, should they be? Like, and this is sort of where I think my frustration, when we circle back to discussing, like, what the criticism is of Dave Meltzer. Like, it shouldn't a criticism of WWE go beyond just, are they hot? Like, are they selling tickets? Like, that's kind of like the matches, were they good? Were they worth, like you said, were they worth a stadium show? Were they worth it, the money paid for the audience? Like, were those people happy to see that? Like, yes, obviously Rhea Ripley, but I don't know.
But that makes a huge difference on when you go back. So we've talked about this many a times with AEW's attendance problems. And one of the big things has been they've gone to somewhere, sold a ton of tickets or sold a good amount of tickets, delivered a shit show, right, or a very poor value show, barely any of the main characters wrestlers wrestling. Yep. There's one, I always think about the Rampage before Revolution in San Francisco, where Moxley's in the building, but they're running, what essentially were dark matches as a show people have bought tickets to. So you will discourage people from coming back next time if you give them that poor kind of level of delivery. And I think it's really interesting to see how their tickets go for the rest of the year, because I look at their numbers going out of Mania season, and last year they were selling out shows in February for the spring and the summer. Yeah, and we're not seeing that. So they have had some strong house kind of gates for house shows. They've had some strong TV gates. They've had some weaker TV gates, which we weren't seeing as much of. So especially once you finish the Cody thing. And it depends, I guess, you keep The Rock around, you can kind of do bits and pieces with him, and that'll help your live numbers, same as the way it always does with Cena. But we're seeing with the SmackDown rating this week. Yep. It's in the 0.7s this week. So you would always, and you're always going to get that. These things always normalize. You cannot keep somebody at that high level where you just, every week when you use them, where you're going to get 0.7, unless the story gets like really, really hot. And this kind of shows a bit of normalization. So, yeah, they have a really interesting part of the year, and people say, "Oh, it doesn't matter," but there are a few things, there's reasons as to why it matters. So, first of all, profitability-wise compared to UFC, so they make more money than UFC in terms of gross revenue, but they're not profitable. No. Some of that comes from they want taxpayer dollars, they want site fees for all their pay-per-views. I think it looks very much like Cleveland have given them a ton of money for SummerSlam coming up. And that's a trust thing as well. So I think when you saw the TKO business call, it was very interesting to watch kind of Mark Shapiro and Ari Emanuel to just kind of try to draw themselves away from the Vince McMahon thing. and kind of try and make them a separate company in the whole thing of, we want taxpayers' dollars, therefore we need the buying of sponsors, the buying of these cities, and trust. So that's where that whole kind of thing coming through. And, we're seeing kind of a drip feed of people exposing kind of sexual misconduct in different areas of WWE, somewhat to, a new audience. But it's not having an impact on the wider scale of the business right now, because a lot of it is more hearsay than anything. There's not as much clear-cut detail going in, and it's not in that wider scale. But there will be things that do. So that is going to affect that trust relationship as they try and increase that probability. Did you notice, you've seen the same way, do you think Triple H is trying to put himself absolutely everywhere at the moment?
It's freaking crazy right now. Like, the amount of on-screen stuff he's doing, it feels like it's more than since he's come back in this role with Vince's first departure.
Yeah, it's like he either feels himself untouchable or he needs to make himself untouchable.
Yeah.
Is it a defense mechanism? In the same way, like Nick Khan just kind of disappeared. He kind of cropped up for 30 seconds on the conference call, but in the most part, he just kind of disappears into the background, knowing that, he was on the board when Vince was kind of reinstated in early 2023. So it's kind of, he's crept in the background, whereas Triple H is kind of doing the opposite. And I kind of feel like it's a defense for it, rather than being, I'm untouchable, like, oh no, nothing's wrong, I'm out here, I knew nothing to do with it. When they're kind of cancelling press conferences or just using them as kind of like an extra promo space. There's no kind of criticism of them or anything like that, so they can't get out into the media, because look how disruptive that press conference was after the Royal Rumble.
Hugely disruptive to them.
Yeah, so the answer that he gave to Brandon Thurston about not reading the lawsuit, that made many major outlets. So they are absolutely not wanting any involvement in that, but that story is going to keep coming out. There's always going to be people looking into things now. And even though we've lost Vice, Tim Marshman said he's still focusing on the story. Wall Street Journal, it's going to come back out. The Feds are involved. So they have some challenges to their kind of business model going forward on that side, but also creativity wise, once you complete this kind of Cody thing, you've got to try and keep business hot in a way that you didn't really need to last year. Right. I think there's much more challenges to that this year. And, especially if AEW kind of, with all the kind of, because for a lot, especially the younger fan base, having kind of a big return or a debut, that sort of thing, it kind of attracts their eyes. So longevity wise, it doesn't always happen. You need to be able to build that, and you've got to keep your 35 to 49. We've seen how critical that has been over the last few years. But you will get eyes on 34. So if some of them are diverted away from WWE, especially post WrestleMania, back to AEW, then that's going to increase pressure as well. So I don't think their position is as sure as they think it is. I think it's really, really interesting that they don't have a home for Raw.
That's so enormous.
No revenue currently for Raw US distribution between October and December. Now, I know Brian Alvarez made the suggestion that perhaps that means that USA are going to put SmackDown on Monday nights. And I know there's been lots of suggestions, even in their own press release on the actual open day, that it would keep it on Friday, but it would actually make far more sense to put it on Monday. But it does seem kind of interesting that this huge product, which has, just generated, he keeps saying it, 5.2 billion in TV rights with Netflix across, pretty much the entire world other than Saudi Arabia in the next couple of years, isn't able to find a home on US television for them, or at least a paying home for those 3 months.
I think it just ties back to, I think my frustration at some of this ties back to the way that, and it's wrong for me to be frustrated at Dave Meltzer specifically because he's one dude. But again, we talked about the significance of him being just the one dude, in that he, I think unknowingly sometimes drives a lot of the way these perceptions are come across. Right. And so, we talk about, I think a lot of how he talks about AEW is like, this is good, this is good, this is good, but here's 3 or 4 major risk problems for them moving forward. And a lot of this, I think, is tied to the uncertainty about the television deals. And from his perspective, as a business perspective, with the TV deals uncertain, then the future of the company still remains uncertain, right? And like you talked about at the top of our show, once you have those TV deals, that is the biggest influx of cash into AEW, and that sort of ensures their Right. So Dave looks at it and says they don't have that TV deal, therefore their position is precarious, therefore these things are risk factors that I need to point out. From a wrestling fan perspective, and from me as a fan perspective, I see AEW being held to a standard that WWE is not held to, right? We talk about the risk factors with WWE in the audience. We talk about well, hey, how are they not, if they're such a hot commodity, how are they not getting any of these free agents? What are the risks for their creative? What are they going to do? They're running down Rock, and Rock is running down Seth in social media promos. Is Rock going to do house shows at any time? Seth's the guy who's there. He's going to sell your freaking tickets to your audience. Do you want to be shitting on him? That's the kind of thing that if anybody else is doing it, I feel like Dave would be like, this is a big, big problem. And I feel like because I understand why he isn't, but I feel like because he isn't, it influences the way that everyone else talks about AEW. It's a big piece of why it's this kind of things are going great, but they could still close at any moment mentality that I find so frustrating. And I expect it from other outlets, and I don't expect it from him. And I think that sort of flavors when they ask, is Dave lost his edge? I say, no, but this frustrates me.
And it's across all the other outlets as well in general, other than maybe, Voices of Wrestling in that regard. But you see it because so many of them are co-opted in certain stories in some way, or things are, to generate hype, or, so there is a huge element of that. And it's still that element in the business that we've spoken so many times about, of people thinking that you haven't made it unless you've been in WWE, wrestlers thinking you haven't made it unless you've been in WWE. Sting pointed out he talked about Kenny Omega yesterday, or, your yesterday. I'm so confused with these date times. But it's
on Sunday.
On Sunday. On Sunday. But he talked about, he thinks in the industry, Kenny is underrated because he's never been to WWE. So you're still fighting that mentality. And that is such a huge broad stroke in terms of how this is all interpreted. And this thing about you can't be a strong number, it's really hard being the number 2 promotion. Yeah, it is, but there's never been this amount of TV money available and the ability to coexist that there is now.
Right.
It's a different landscape. This whole landscape, and WWE can't just kind of gobble them up because, quite frankly, because of the sheer amount of money Tony Khan and his family have. So it's different, and sometimes I wish people would, point out the differences a little bit more. Doesn't make it easy. Doesn't mean that yes, this TV deal is the most important thing for AEW this year. I don't care.
100%.
Anyone else says this is their critical being for it to be successful, and all the other things, the booking, the making stuff, everything else plays off that. But it's not like it's some insurmountable mountain either. And so that's where you've got to be careful with kind of that analysis. And it's kind of good to see when people, like Brandon Ferguson does cross analysis and looks at, what's happening with the attendance trends in WWE, what's happening with AEW, what's happening in here or New Japan. So you've got to kind of show a picture of everyone rather than just kind of focusing on one thing or not focusing on one thing. Because if you spot the trends early, you'll see where things are going way before. Whereas there's a tendency to wait to something's in a situation. We talk about AEW tickets. This has been an issue now since kind of mid-2022. You could spot this in mid-22. You could see it coming. We did see it coming.
Yep.
And it's one of those things. So you want to try to identify the trends early so they can be spotted, and then do that analysis then, and what's changing to cause that, rather than when it gets to a certain point. And it's the same way people look at WWE, like, why are they hot now? But they're hot now because they were so successful at the start of last year. Okay, so what's going to keep them hot going into next year? Does it even? And then people are like, well, it doesn't even matter because of TK. Well, it does matter actually, because they've got to deliver far more profitability than they did ever before. And you can do it on certain deals, but you still need that fan investment to support those deals.
This is why the lack of any in-depth reporting, and I want to stress WrestleNomics as much as possible because, we're talking about ticket sales and we're talking about stuff like that. They did a year-over-year chart today for the different quarters, and you could really see in the AEW chart the trend down for returning for difference in first-time markets, right, or returning markets in terms of what their tickets were. Really sort of crystallized what we've talked about in terms of how their ticket sale problems have gone back to 2022. They're not new issues. They're not things that are right. Like, I can't stress WrestleNomics enough, and if you can throw them a little bit of money and you're interested in that kind of nerd stuff, which obviously, hopefully, you are a little bit because you're listening to us. I mean, we are the definition of nerd shit. But I think it comes back to that thing. You have one guy who does in-depth analysis. What he talks about, even in offhand comment, is picked up by a dozen aggregators who either truncate it or remove context. And therefore it becomes this sort of doom cycle of the same little tidbits of information. Like Dave talks about the stuff that he's obsessed with in the same way we talk about the stuff we are obsessed with, right? We talk about Hangman on this podcast all the fucking time. That's our jam, right? There's probably other wrestlers.
He's our mascot at this point.
He's our mascot at this point. There's other wrestlers we could probably talk about more, but we don't because that's our situation, right? That doesn't mean that all AEW analysis should center around Hangman because we shouldn't be the only people doing this. I think this is where the frustration and like tying back to what the comment was about Dave is because he is the only person, his flaws are more noticeable. Because he is the only person in the way that the aggregators fixate on him to do the work for them so that they can get the hits and they can get the revenue, it drives the conversation in ways that I think sometimes he's not fully aware of. Dave spends hours of each day arguing with people with no Twitter followers on Twitter, right? And what's funny is how many people have commented on how Dave talks on Twitter, like, why on earth would you ever think that AEW is failing? AEW is incredibly successful. And it's very different than how he talks about AEW on some radio show sometimes, where it's like, Dave, you know, the way you talk, it's like, well, they'll never be a successful number two. Like, but that's kind of not what you're saying. So there's something being lost in translation there somewhere, or maybe you're driving the conversation in a way that you don't realize that you are. Right. But again, all this ties back to it not necessarily being fair to him because he's not Vince McMahon. Dave did not drive every single other wrestling news person out of existence. He'd be very happy for other people to be doing the same job, but they're not because it's much more difficult to make a living and make money. It's a lot easier to send out, $5 scoops and say, hey, guess what? Mike Santana is no longer on the AEW roster page. Like, no shit.
That has value to people as well, but yes. I just don't think it's, if that's all we have, then we're in trouble. That's just the way I look at it. Right. And, I've always been number based. I've always been interested because it just drives so much in wrestling that people just don't want to acknowledge. They just want to say, oh, I like this guy. He should be getting a push. And then, or I love the one, and I'll say, why is this guy in a match? And then you'll look at his TV numbers, or you'll look at when he has a live, and then you'll go, oh yeah, that's why he's in a match, because at the moment he's driving TV in this demo or this training, whatever. So it's just, you just got to put the picture. And, the thing with AEW going forward next few months is they're going to have a much stronger March. They're in big markets. They're being rerouted. They're doing the work on that. People wonder why Worcester is so close to Boston. You can see that date's been moved. But that's a necessary evil. It's one of them things. But yeah, they're going to do the work to kind of spend more time in kind of big markets to get that kind of big crowd response and to build that up. Because one of the big things about AEW at the start was, they had these great atmospheres.
Yes.
There's nothing worse than wrestling to silence. They had these great atmospheres. It was lively. The crowd played along. They were invested in the product, in the company. So they cheered, they cheered the baby faces, booed the heels, all the things I go on about that people think I'm crazy. But, it's a difference making money. But you want to kind of get to that point again. And the best way to do that is to be going to bigger markets with bigger, kind of populations. And, they've done all the research. They know where people are invested in their product around the country. So use that, don't be going to places so much. You need to go to them, but don't go to so much where there is lesser investment in your product and you need to work harder to do the very basics. Then you can focus on driving those numbers up or managing your pricing structures or everything like that. But you need to be in the right places to start with. And then that gives you the reactions to your characters where people go, oh, this guy, must be, or this woman must be absolutely fantastic because look at the reaction they're getting. And it might drive people in to see the building, because sometimes you get so many people, I pick on Adam Copeland all the time, but he is absolutely a building reaction wrestler. People go absolutely nuts for him. But how many tickets does he sell? Not many. So you've got to get that conversion up, and that's the kind of the key. And it's probably the most difficult thing in wrestling. But you can't think that the build for these shows and, the excitement coming out of this pay-per-view isn't going to help them. Yeah, you can't make somebody by, winning in a main event match or losing a main event match in terms of that being all of it. But it's all about generating momentum. And it's the same with the debuts and everything else. So there should be coming out of this. And you can see some of it in the March figures as well. There is some momentum coming out of this. And capitalizing on that will make their year. And once they get a TV deal wrapped up, then thank God we don't have to hear about that for a while. Because oh God,
that's fucking annoying.
Yeah, it's all about creating momentum.
I think it's I'm very excited that they put Jay versus Darby for Big Business. I think that's a great show to have that on. Like, those are two people who have not that's like, again, the best of AEW. You have two guys who have not wrestled each other before, who have an opportunity to do something new and different. That's a matchup that's new and different. And I think that's one of the nice things about having a little bit of an influx of new people is that you have some new matchups that you can do. And I think, obviously Jay deserves some, get him the fuck away from Billy Gunn. I'm not going to get into my Billy Gunn rant now. It's coming at some point, but Jesus fucking Christ.
Another match built around Billy Gunn. What the fuck
or maybe I'm going to do 3 seconds of my Billy Gunn rant, but what the fuck are we doing? I appreciate that you want to, if you can say that Sting is the best possible way to use a veteran, what the fuck are we doing with Billy Gunn? Why is he still the centerpiece of the fucking Acclaimed? The guy is 60 years old, and he was not a main event wrestler at his prime either. Why is the hot tags being built around him? Why are the matches being built around him? Why is he taking the lead in the fucking promos, right? Why is you having Billy Gunn and Jay White and another Gunn's son in a trios match? Why you can't give that to Bowens or Caster? This just makes it is way past time for that group to break up. It is way past time for the Acclaim to lose those belts and go back to the start. They have just squandered what was at one time an incredibly popular and over act. And I genuinely think Billy Gunn is a significant portion as to why that's happened. It's just, it's criminal. And the fact that Billy Gunn was one of the people bitching about how nobody in AEW took advice. If this is the advice he was giving them, they shouldn't have listened to it. It's awful.
It's just selfish. It's selfish. It's just awful. It's selfish, and it's the opposite of the original kind of AEW mentality. And a mentality we're seeing a lot more with the top guys. And, Darby's going away after that one, so you'd think you'd use that to propel White, and you'll need him. So, yeah, we're actually building a little bit of a core roster of heels now. And he's going to be cheered a little bit, so you've got to work around that. But he's good enough to do... the way he works, I always talk about how he cuts off momentum rather than controlling matches. Yes. And that will always help him to kind of work these matches against all these baby faces. So, yeah, there's lots of people well positioned now. I think that's much stronger than it was a few months ago. And but there are some there. You just got to fix that. Just get him out of that tag division. What are we doing?
Get him out of the fucking.
He'll be fine. Jay White's one of the best talkers in the world. He's a great worker. He is still young. There's so many stuff you can call back and you can do with. And we'll see how we go. So I think that's everything for today.
We've covered so many topics and so vehemently. Maybe you weren't as vehement. You're rarely as vehement as me, Trish, but vehemently nonetheless. I feel like,
So, well, I'm actually awake for this one, so that's quite nice. So my time difference. So, I am going to bid you adieu shortly, and I'm going to go watch Kenta Miyahara and Korakuen Hall, which is...
I'm so excited for you.
How cool is that? So, I can't ask for more than that. We might talk some New Japan next time around as well, since we're going to the anniversary show tomorrow. We'll see how Jack Perry does with Shota Umino. That's going to be interesting. That is going to play back into AEW, so that will be it. All right, so this has been the Trish and Sarah Wrestling Podcast. We are a proud member of the Social Suplex Network. Thank everybody still for welcoming us so kindly over there. It's been great, actually, hasn't it? Just all the feedback we get. I'm not very good at Discord sometimes, but I do love, the fact that we can just interact with people on Discord so freely without all the kind of qualms and annoyances of Twitter. So if you do want to interact with us, or indeed anybody from ONR, from Keeping It Strong Style, from the Amazing Tunnel Talk, they have some great discussions actually on character at the moment. I'm always in their channel just kind of reading. Going through things. But you can join us on the Social Suplex, can't speak my words today, Social Suplex Discord across over there. You can view all the podcasts on this amazing network on their website. You can also find us on Twitter. Sarah has a Twitter.
I know.
You're like the last convert to Twitter.
a friend said, "Why did you get a Twitter in 2024?" And I was like, "I don't know. I was having a weird day. What can I tell you? I'm out there, friends. I'm out there. I'm hot takes every day."
You are at Sarah Graps, is that right?
Yeah. With
Sarah
an H,
Graps. Yes, at Sarah Graps. You can find me at Trish48, causing havoc. Can't even think my own username. This is far too early for me. This is what we've learned. You can find the podcast at Trish and Sarah, any questions, anything you want to bring up for topics going forward. You can also email us at Trish and Sarah Pod, trishandsarahpod@gmail.com. We do love all your feedback. Even if you hate us and you think we're too negative, I love that too, because I am miserable. So, but no, it's always invaluable. It really shapes kind of what we do. Also, it's kind of good to read when it just gets into discussion on some of the topics and people say, I agree with this, or I don't agree with that. And it kind of really helps to, reassess my own viewpoint. I don't know about yourself, but I find it really, really useful in that regard. So yeah, please continue to interact with us. It's invaluable. And we will be back in 2 weeks with our amazing producer, Leah, who was absolutely right on Jungle Jack and Matt Jackson.
Yep. She called it.
Yay. She called it. We will be back in 2 weeks with our next episode. So until then, I've been Trish.
I've been Sarah.
And this is the Trish and Sarah Wrestling Podcast.